Thank you, Mr. Gant. While we are conducting town business using remote participation via Zoom, we ask that those of you not recognized by the chair, otherwise engaged in the discussion of the moment, please mute your microphone.
Thank you, Marshall. All right, so the first item on our agenda is an overview of the master plan. So I'll turn this over to you, Kevin.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Good evening, everyone. Similar to the last session, we have a couple of we have an important announcement or important item that I wanted to make sure I brought the board up to speed with. We've talked about this in the past, the master plan, but I have some specific updates I wanted to make sure I passed along tonight to everyone. So I have some good news, and that's the genesis of today's meeting. Over the last 2 years, I've had a chance to work with Martha Morrison and the planning board regarding the town moving forward with a comprehensive master plan. The goal being to have a community-wide conversation about what we have now, what we'd like to see in the for the future regarding economic development opportunities, as well as what we want to protect in the future as well, and also how we go about achieving this.
How we go about
achieving those goals that we set out in there, sort of the roadmap in a sense. Master plans in towns like Topsfield are ultimately the responsibility of the planning board. Any changes that are recommended have to go through the planning board, adopted by. And so after a number of conversations with Ms. Morrison, chair of the planning board, we applied for grants back towards the end of 2021 through Housing and Economic Development. And there were 68 applicants, and of those 68, Topsfield was one of 16 to be successful in the competitive grant cycle for a master plan for $100,000. At the time, though, we were told that the master plan money would have to be spent per the contract they sent us by June 30th of 22. And so we know that a master plan takes 16 months plus or minus typically, and that having really about 6 months, 5 to 6 months to complete a master plan is not realistic, especially if we're going to do it right. And so been working with the state delegation as well as representatives from the Housing and Economic Development, as well as Secretary Keneally himself. I had a chance to mention this, the situation we found ourselves in with the timing and the monies that were awarded. And on Monday, I had a conversation with the grantor, the person within the secretary's office who is responsible for the administration of the grants. And he confirmed to me that the funds will be 100% provided to the town if we go to contract with the consultant prior to the end of June. So that's significant news for us. I do have an email to that effect from Juan Vega from the department who I spoke with. And it'll give us enough time to both receive the 100% of the funds at the end of the fiscal year and have those available to us to use for that consultant and the costs associated with it. So next steps, now that we know we have some money, I hope to dive a little bit deeper into it with the board, make sure I answer.
Could I ask you something before we go to next steps? Just how much time do we have now to spend? What was the length of time they gave us to actually conduct the master plan, to build it?
It's actually open-ended at this point. The monies will be available to us, and there's no deadline on their end. I mean, realistically, they'll want us to complete it in a timely fashion, but there's no hard end date to it. The other mechanism we were working on is probably worth noting and thanking the appreciation to Senator Lovely's office and the Chief of Staff, Joe Whalen, in the office. Spoke with them about also helping us extend it if the Housing and Economic Development was not able to do so through an earmark on an appropriation bill, extending the monies into fiscal 23. So if we went that route, it would have had an end date of the end of fiscal 23, but the monies will be coming available to us up front. And so there wouldn't necessarily be a hard finish. I think our goal would be certainly to finish before the end of fiscal 3 regardless. Anyway.
That's excellent. Great job.
Sure is.
Again, the idea that it'll be upfront, meaning that they will provide us with $100,000 that we'll put in an account for the purposes of this master plan.
Yes, sir. Absolutely. So what will happen mechanically is we'll be bringing to the select board on the 28th a contract with the state to receive funds for the master plan. It will have, once that's executed, we receive 50% of the $100,000, so $50,000. And then when we go to contract with the third party vendor, we show proof of the contract to Mr. Vega. Mr. Vega then releases the remaining 50%, the other $50,000 to the town.
Kevin, is that the first time you've applied for a grant for this?
For a master plan?
Yeah.
I believe we applied for about a year ago. Off the top, Mr. Brown, I can't think of the exact which funding source it was, but we have applied once prior to this as well for the master plan.
I guess what I was really digging at is what's changed for if we've done it before. What made this one, one of 16?
So what changed in this one? I couldn't definitively answer that question only because
okay.
I'm not there present, but I did have a chance to talk with Mr. Vega about the next round of grants because we're already thinking about the next one, right? Which are opening up shortly. And he and I talked about he reviews all the applications himself, and we talked about he's a good person to know, and we had a very positive conversation. We talked about what they're looking for, and I actually mentioned a couple projects to get his initial feedback on them. So I know that he said when they look at the applications, they read so many applications, they want it to be interesting, they want it to be dynamic, they want it to sort of, in a sense, pitch it and sell it to them.
Yeah.
There. So we tried to do our with this application. We made some tweaks from the last one as well.
That's awesome. Congratulations. That's great.
Thank you. Yeah.
Next steps then, Kevin?
Yeah. So first one will be acceptance of the grants on the 28th, like I mentioned. Then we'll receive the 50% allocation to the town. What we've been doing in preparation, because we're trying to move as thoughtfully but as streamlined as possible in the process, is we've actually drafted an RFP, which has been sent to the planning board, and Martha Morrison, the planning chair, has redlined that for us. So we have a draft redlined RFP that's in our possession that we've been working on. We've also spoken with we did Zoom calls with 5 different reputable master plan consulting firms who could support us. All 5, as we told them about what we're trying to accomplish and what we've been working on, all 5 indicated that they would plan to apply in response to the RFP to be a potential partner of ours through the process. The planning board has crafted a preliminary list of participants for our master plan steering committee. It's a very good list of people that they're thinking of including. Right this time, it's very draft. We haven't spoken with people quite yet. We didn't want to set expectations too early, but it's a really great representation from the community that the planning board prepared. Martha Morrison shared with me that we're excited for. And then from just a timeline standpoint, the hope is the reason we've done a lot of this legwork up front, not knowing for sure on the grant and where we land, is because we want to make sure we're moving through the process. Like I mentioned, it's a 16-month process. We might be able to take some of that time down based on scope and which vendor and their capacity. But we want to make sure if we can that we're efficient with it. So plan is to release the RFP as soon as we can. And once we receive the respondents' official applications, we'll speak with them, interview, and then choose one to move forward with. And then once we go to contract, we look to come back to the board with the vendor, as it will be a contract greater than $25,000 and would need the support of the select board as well.
Kevin, do you know timing wise, will we know what those RFPs look like prior to the finalization of the budget to see if we need to put any additional funds in there or whether the 100,000 covers the scope?
That's a great question, Madam Chair. I appreciate you asking that because, as we know, I've put a placeholder into the budget. In the warrant for potentially some funding that give us a little bit more room on the scope. Initial take with some of the conversations we had after receiving the grant, but meeting with the different groups, is that they think that might be on the lighter side, the 100,000, and that we might to do it the way with the public participation being the driver, the number one driver of this plan. That might add a little bit more funding necessary if we decide in the scope that we want to move forward with, that we might have that. So the plan would be to move the RFP as soon as possible, see what the respondents come back with and with a cost, and we'll be in our warrant process and we can adjust accordingly. If it comes in at 100,000, fantastic. We won't need any local monies to offset that. If it comes back greater, we'll have to have the conversation if we want to continue to move forward with local monies contributing to it through the free cash. Excuse me. Or if we want to pare down the scope of work potentially as well to get back down to the 100,000. So that's another. I appreciate that because that's another driver on the timelines because we are going through our warrant cycle as well.
Is that something in the RFP, Kevin, that you, because I don't know what that scope looks like, that you and the planning board have discussed? Are you putting it out to do all of the above, and then like the next level down, like if there are portions of that scope that the planning board and you feel we could do without because we've either done the legwork in previous studies or it's not as critical for us? Will the RFP be presented that way so they can give us price A and price B?
Absolutely. So what we'll do is we list in it the planning exercises that we've already done. So we have the downtown revitalization, the MVP. We've done a number of, I think there's a housing stock that was done maybe 10 years ago, 8 years ago through the planning board. I believe there's another planning report that we have. Those will be incorporated. Each group we met with did say, give us the reports you've already done. That's going to save us time, save you money, and we can incorporate those into the master plan, the entirety of it. So those reports will be part of it, and they're listed in the RFP. One of the bigger drivers is going to be how much public participation, how many times they're doing meetings on site. And we'll get a sense probably before we release it, the RFP that is, do we want to pare it back at all? If it's really kind of on the high end and they're going to come in at $200,000, which I don't think they will. We'll look at that one more time before we release anything, just to make sure that that's a reasonable scope of work, so we can get close to that 100,000. We don't want to spend less because we want to spend the full grant, but we'll have to make some judgment calls probably on that scope as well as we get closer.
So do you see the RFP as having what we would normally call add-ins? In other words, we've got a pretty basic one, and then there are various add-ins in the priority that we think they should be, and that's where we'd be able to understand how much we'll need if something is beyond 100,000. We have the decision to make. Absolutely,
it's a great point. In the RFP, we can do just that. We can have that add-in options for people to put a price to. 3 standard meetings, a 4th meeting, and a 5th meeting would cost this, right? And that's where we can sort of have that menu of options of what we want to move forward with. If the cost is reasonable and it's important, we can make that judgment call to spend additional funds, or we can pare it down, obviously. So absolutely. It's a great point.
Kevin, at the beginning of this, I think you mentioned that there's one deadline that you got to meet, one thing you got to accomplish by the end of the fiscal year. Expand on that a little bit and tell me if that's true, and is it going to be difficult for you to meet that deadline?
Because of a lot of the legwork that the planning board, Martha Morrison, and myself, and Donna Rich, we've been able to continue to move forward with, we're at a very good place to be able to release the RFP soon. We'll probably advertise it for 45 days, maybe 30 days, have the respondents interview or speak with them, and then be able to go to contract prior to June 30th, which is really critical. That's the date that Housing and Economic Development said you need to go to contract with. So as long as we meet that timeline and that threshold, we'll have the full $100,000 for our ability to spend on this. I don't think that will be an issue as long as there isn't any major curveballs thrown at us from now until we release the RFP.
Thank you.
And what were you saying about the 28th and our next meeting? What are you
so now that
there?
So now that we have confirmation that we can use these monies beyond the end of this fiscal year, we are going to bring to the select board the contract we received about a month ago from Housing and Economic Development, the standard grant contract that provides us with confirmation that we'll receive the monies. So
this is the grant acceptance. You're saying the grant acceptance.
That's correct. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
So just a little bit of depth, and I don't want to I don't want to get too much out of the mechanics of this, but just for master plan purposes, because it's been some time since Topsfield performed a full comprehensive master plan. So what we can expect, there's really 9 components of a master plan. First is land use and development. Housing is the second. Economic development is the third. Public facilities, infrastructure, and services is the fourth. Transportation is 5. Natural, cultural, and historical resources is 6. Open space and recreation is 7. Public participation is 8. And I really want to emphasize that is, in my personal opinion, I know Madam the Chair of the Planning Board agrees, and I know talking with this group, I would imagine you also agree. This is probably the most important part of the master plan. Engaging the community, understanding the priorities, what we see for opportunities going forward, but also what do we want to protect as resources, what we have as a community, the feel of it, the scale of it, the things that make Topsfield, and that's important as well. So that really is a big part of that needs to be community driven. And so that's where, public participation is one of the 9 components, but personally, I'm excited to hear what the public has to say and what their desires are. And hopefully that will inform how the master plan is ultimately written by the consultant and the recommendations from it. So really want to emphasize that component. And then the last piece of the master plan is the implementation plan. This could include zoning recommendations, identify areas we should preserve and protect, and how possibly to do so. But also much more, it's a roadmap, and like I said at the top, of ways we can achieve what ultimately comes as the desires and wishes of the community.
Hey, Kevin, going back to public participation, sorry. How do we inform, the town that they're invited to think about and submit ideas, bids, whatever? What's your idea behind that, or how do you see doing that?
So a big part of it will be relying on the consultants who do this in multiple different communities, and they'll come up with creative ways to do it. What you'll usually have is it's similar to when MAPC did the downtown revitalization plan, and where we had the 200 or plus people, as I understand, up at the public hall. It's really, I think in a community like Topsfield, it's really a grassroots effort to get the word out. Yep. By the time we have a social media platform, we'll be able to share information there. Obviously, leverage the website, leverage the local media as well. Master plans are significant, so we should go to the Salem News and let them know, so someone can pick up the newspaper and hear what we're up to. The more transparency and the more participation, the better. So this will be a major component of this. And I've seen in master plan processes tables being set up at the Strawberry Festival, as an example, and different local like that to let people know and hand out flyers. Community events like that, obviously promoting it through this mechanism here, through our meetings, and the public meeting sessions will be important. But we'll come up with probably I wouldn't say that one size fits all, obviously, but there's a lot of good ideas that when we're interviewing the consultants, I'd be curious to see what they propose for Topsfield for just that.
I mean, because a fair percentage of our community is likely not online, I wonder if a very small portion of those proceeds could be used for direct mail, for people who may not be reading. At the most, we're talking about 1,900 households, or I forget the exact number in Topsfield, but I don't want to exclude anybody. This is really important to get everybody's voice.
Absolutely. And I should have said this, leveraging the COA as well, right? We've got the newsletter that goes out there. That we want to check as many demographics to schools. I mean, obviously we need permission to put in a backpack, but this is significant. And I think it would be important that we look at that demographic as well, and the parents of school-age children as well. So direct mail, absolutely. That's something that when we did this in Beverly, we did a direct mailing at one point during the process as well. So it's not something that's unusual.
We also did the library in the past. We did the historical commission. They all have lists. So there are a lot of affinity groups that were a great source of getting word out for various things in the past.
Nice. Great.
the good news, Cam, is that
Yep.
the planning board has been through this recently, especially Martha. So they know how to do this. It's their responsibility to do it.
Mhm.
They know how to do it because they've done it recently. So that's the good news.
That is good news.
Yeah, and just Kevin, I just want to thank you for all the legwork that you, Martha, and the planning board have been doing up front for this in anticipation of getting the okay to extend it beyond fiscal year, the end of June 22. So there's a lot that's already gone into this. So we're in a great launching spot, to Boyd's point about being able to get that RFP out and the contract signed with plenty of time to move forward. So.
Yeah, thank you, Madam
Great.
Chair. Been a great
Any
team.
other questions for Kevin on this? Otherwise, we'll move on to the warrant.
Yeah, I think that the main thing, though, on the RFP is that it's really the planning board that has to prepare the RFP, because they're the ones that have to do that sort of thing. And the question I would have, though, is you mentioned we've so far contacted 5 of them, and that's the planning board has already done that. That's pretty impressive for the number of frequency of their meetings and that. So they've talked with 5 of them.
So Martha Morrison and I talked about reaching out to different firms. She identified some and I identified some as well. And so we reached out after consulting Martha Morrison. She was invited to the meetings to have a conversation with the different groups, just to let them know that this is something Topsfield's working on, without getting into any details of the priorities, letting them know that this is something that's on the horizon.
And Martha's been very supportive and helpful. She's come to the ECDC meetings to talk with Kevin about the process for this master plan. So she's kept that group up to date as well. So you're going to be joined at the hip, and planning is leading this, which is great, because as Dick said, they've been through it before. They know the path, but working closely together for the overall view of the town, and any other inputs that we can provide and support are terrific. So. Okay.
About joined at the hip. It's really the planning board that's doing it, and we'll have a representative hopefully on it from the select board. I can't imagine we wouldn't have, but it's really the planning board that's driving it.
It is. However, the resource support that Kevin and his team are providing are very valuable, since, as you said, Dick, they don't meet all that frequently, and there'll be a lot of interaction with the consultant. So we'll take the lead from what they need and work together towards that, however we can help. All right. Moving on then, because we have a lot to cover. We haven't really gone into any detail with the warrants. Kevin, do you want to kick off the review?
Thank you. Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Madam Chair. Warrant. So on Monday, I distributed a version 1 copy of the warrant, which is the build out from the list that was provided in the week prior to that, of the items that we've discussed adding into the warrant. Many of them, for tonight's purpose, I hope to answer any questions you might have. Have an open conversation about what's in there. There's concerns, questions, thoughts. Just from a timeline standpoint, the hope is discuss this tonight. Hopefully get some guidance from the board. And then I'll get right to work on a version 2, which will include updates on many of the yellow highlights, which represent items at the time of distribution on Monday. We're still needing to get finalized, such as the location for the town meeting. We talked about that being, with COVID, still a little bit in flux, as an example, nailing down some of the other items. We also had in the blue height. Oh, sorry, Madam Chair. Yep.
Sorry. Could I just ask you, from a time perspective, when do we need to approve this in order for you and your team to get it to the printer in time? What date are we moving towards?
Madam Chair, if you just, it's right over there in my file. I'll be right.
Oh yeah, no problem.
Specifically, what date were you looking for, Lynn?
The date when we have to have this all clean, approved for it to go to print.
Oh, to go to print, 35 days before the town meeting, you do the calculation, essentially the end.
35
Yeah,
days
so-
prior, so end of March. Okay.
Because that's the date that you have to have any ballot stuff.
Okay.
So it's always the end.
Kevin, thanks. Dick just shared it's 35 days prior to the meeting.
Town
Did you
meeting.
say? Town meeting.
Yeah, we are going to print April. April 1 is our Friday, April 1st. We'll deliver to the printer. We expect to have that returned by the 11th, usually earlier than that, which is a full week, gets us a full week plus. And then the warrant will be mailed to residents on April 12th.
Okay. And so, and that's all based upon trying to have the town meeting on the 7th of May.
It's actually based on the 3rd. When we've created the schedule, we used the Tuesday as the date. So if we do push it to that next Saturday,
It's just a little extra cushion.
we'll have a little bit of breathing, but we'll hit the deadlines regardless.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Now,
So
what condition would you consider version 1 in? We're going to agree that it is extremely rough. Is that what you're going to start with?
I don't know definition wise, but I know there's a lot of work that still needs to go into it. Obviously, I think the yellow will be a quick once we get those numbers. For instance, some of it's confirming like indirect costs. I have those. They weren't inserted on the first version of the warrant.
Well, we can just go through each one because it is what it is, and we'll see what kind of headway we can make right now. Kevin, I'm sure you have a number of updates to go in here because some of the information we've talked about since Monday, but we'll get them one at a time as we go through.
Yeah. So, so if you just before Article 1st, you see the highlighted areas. That's just confirming the times that'll be provided as we move a little bit closer. So with the indirect costs from the balance transfers, those will be. I have those. Those will likely be in version 2 that you'll hopefully see next week.
When you say the indirect costs, what are you referring to, Kevin?
In Article 2, we transfer costs. For instance, the cable peg fund, we transfer money from an outside fund, like a revolving account or something, or like the conservation one, into the budget to offset our costs. And so that is a standard article that we have every year. And that one's easy enough just to update the numbers, exactly what those are.
Can I just ask where that money comes from? Is that underspent money or money that's coming in for the cable peg, the 54,000?
Yep. So we basically receive, in this case, the balance, the budget, we anticipate bringing over 54,850 out of the PEG account to help with the balancing of the budget, right? So those monies came in and now they're going back in to offset the costs within the operating budget.
Okay, and they came in from where?
Outside sources. So for Conservation Commission, it's permits.
But for cable peg specifically, is that coming in from Verizon?
Verizon and Comcast.
From Verizon.
Okay.
Verizon, Comcast.
Both, right? Yep.
Both, yeah.
Okay.
So can I make a suggestion to think about? The $10,000 from the revolving fund of Conscom is an arbitrary number. Would you consider making that 9,999 whatever, such that the pennies come out to 00 in the total, and therefore when you go into the next Article 3rd, we're dealing with an even amount of dollars. Don't make the change now, but think about doing that.
I don't see much of an issue on that. I'll talk with the accountant to make sure she's comfortable with it as well. It's certainly something we could do to round that number off, the total number.
Just to make it easier, right? When you get, not in this particular one, because, okay, you got the idea. But
Yep.
Can we go back, though? We did discuss briefly this idea of the town meeting on the 3rd of the 7th. My take is that we need to plan for the 3rd. So amongst other things, we want to make sure that Masconomet has this all set up still. We should have that, which was established about 2 years ago. our dates, and so that should be. But I think it's worth it to check.
We've already put in for the date with Masconomics, so we have that
Good.
secured already, and we're talking with the tent company on the 7th just to make sure we can have available the right size tent.
Can I make a suggestion on the tent? The thing that I think most people remember most from last year is being cold. What I found was that it was warmer to go outside the tent because even though there was no sun, the radiation made it much more comfortable. And I did notice a number of people sitting outside the tent enjoying it a little bit more, but certainly under the tent was the worst. I'm going to suggest that if we are forced to do it on the common, that we do it perhaps without the tent and have an alternative date to do it, where that means a lot of other things. We have to think about the ballots and things like that. But I would suggest we try to do it without the tent because it was cold. And that when I talk with people, that's one of the things they seem to remember the most.
So one thing we've talked about very preliminary is, can we find a way to do heaters? We'll need to talk with the fire chief on that, something like that as an alternative as well. So we do recognize how cold it was. I think everybody, all of us sitting through it, recognize that firsthand. So we're absolutely already starting those conversations on it. I did speak with Lauren Goldberg, and I want to make sure I mention this early because I found this out since the last time we met. The legislation that allowed us to move the election due to COVID has ran its course. It no longer it allows us to move the election date. We still can move in perpetuity from now on based on permanent legislation that was passed. We can move town meeting. So we have the ability to move the town meeting, but we don't have the ability to move the election. And I know it's absolutely makes sense to me, and I know it's tradition that the election follows town meeting, but that's also a consideration as well with regards to that Saturday or the Tuesday. Because if we move town meeting to the Saturday, it'll fall after the election, which will be that Thursday. So all these pieces are now starting to be discussed and come together. And I just want to make sure that the board was aware at this time, we do not have the ability to move the election is my understanding.
Logistically, Kevin, if we have the election before town meeting, I know we have a select board seat that's coming up. Does that mean the new select board member would be at town meeting?
I mean,
yes, the main thing though tends to be the ballot questions, if there's a ballot question of some sort. But the whole thing, but especially the ballot question going into town meeting, have we decided beforehand with a ballot, or do we determine the ballot after the meeting?
Do we have any ballot questions?
What's that?
Do we have any ballot questions?
Not yet.
Not yet.
We may not have. Hopefully, we don't have any, but we don't know.
Let me broach this subject. I understand the romanticism of having the town meeting on the common like we did last year, and there were a lot of people who thought that was really cool, and I believe that's true. I've always been a proponent. When Mark Lyons and I were involved, we did not want to move the town meeting to Masconomet because there are people that said it ought to be in town. And Mark and I agreed with that in those days several years ago. However, it's weather dependent. It's an additional expense. There's now some timing issues that could be an issue with weather. And if we've got Masconomet reserved, why don't we just do it and get it over with and move to Masconomet?
Is there a
Masconomet
COVID concern?
thing, by the way, was not just something we kind of like to do. We did go out and ballot. It was not binding,
Right.
but we did go out to ballot, and I was astounded by the vote because it was I think it was close to 80% said yes, we'd rather go to Masconomet than to do it at Woodbury Auditorium, so to speak. That was the alternative, of course. That's what we had it as. So it was a very strong move to go to Masconomet.
The seats are comfortable.
Is that why we're doing this?
Sorry.
correct me if I'm wrong, the only reason it wasn't at Masconomet, and the only reason we're discussing whether or not it would be is COVID.
Is there still a COVID
all that-
That's right. That's right.
I don't know if there's still a concern. Is there?
So right now, I mean, our director, the chiefs, we've had still regular meetings. The data is showing that the numbers are coming down when it comes to COVID. However, it's so unpredictable. We've had the numbers come down in the past as well. Number one most important thing we do for town meeting is make it accessible for people and make sure everybody feels comfortable, at least the best we can. And so I know there's people who wouldn't go to the tent just because, even though it was open air, well, we had a tent, but it was outdoors. They still didn't feel comfortable coming because of COVID and whatnot. At last year's vaccinations, at that time, were just starting to roll. A number of people in this community in May had already been able to get vaccinated in April with at least their first shot. And so it was still different from 2 years ago to last year. And this year will certainly be different as well. We're going to watch and see what other communities do too. But we have to at least have the conversation, and we're trying to do it early, and that's why we're having it now. But obviously your guidance, the select board's guidance on this is certainly helpful. But to Mr. Hook's point, the only reason we're having the conversation is because COVID is still there. The numbers are getting better, but we want to make sure we're not too late to the game if there's a spike that comes in March or April.
And the only reason I chuckled at your question, Lynn, is because it's not easily answered. Is it still an issue? You ask the people over here and they'll say, no, of course not. You ask the people over here and of course it is. And then, flaming horrible discussions ensue. So, I don't know if there is an easy answer to, is it still an issue? So
I know that a number of people couldn't attend actually on Saturday last year because of all the sports. We have a lot of parents who weren't able to attend. So either way, you're going to have people who aren't able to attend or who don't wish to attend. I just don't know how long we can keep doing this. And to Boyd's point, it's warm, it's not weather dependent, it's not expensive.
The seats are comfortable. And there's plenty of them.
Yeah, how many does it accommodate, Kevin? Do you know, Masco?
I don't off the top. I've never even looked at it because 2 years ago we were outdoors and then last year the same. So we'll certainly,
if we could tape off seats so that they're spaced out as well, so they're not shoulder to shoulder. People who felt uncomfortable could go into spaced out areas. People still food shop. People are still going into schools. They're still going to restaurants. They're still doing a number of things, but with precautions. So if we could set up Masco with precautions, I think I'd be leaning towards that personally.
So I do want to ask though the question as to, are we allowed to move our town meeting? So we had special legislation. I know for the first year it was clearly, there was very special legislation, a lot of discussion about it. And then there was the extension by the governor of all of the things for last year, in our last town meeting, so to speak, and we were able to do it. Then the governor extended the meeting things to April so that we could have remote meetings, and then within the last few weeks, it was extended to, I think, July 15th, sometime in July, that we could have remote meetings. But I don't know that included the moving of annual town meetings. In other words, we have a bylaw and we have to override the bylaw. And that's what the big deal was the first year. So do you know, Kevin, that we actually are able to move it?
I had KP confirm that. So Lauren Goldberg, through Lauren and Matt from KP, I brought it up last week, and I think on Friday they got back and we confirmed that the legislation that was passed did not have a sunset, I guess, or there was something at the state level, and it was a quick conversation just to check the box. To be honest with you, I didn't double check the lawyers on this one, but they indicated that town meeting can be moved based on prior legislation that was passed during the pandemic that allowed town meeting to be moved with local. I believe the select board would have to approve that though. It's not a unilateral. So the ability for the select board to move it exists.
There is that the ability to move a meeting when there's some surprise happens. There's a fire in the building where you're going to have your meeting, so you can't have it, and that includes this work with the moderator. Those things that's there. That was a change, but the ability to simply override without a specific cause such as that, there's no way that we can do it. Something happened, the tornado took the building out, whatever the case may be. So there is that workaround, but that's not what this is. This is to be able to move the meeting around our bylaw. As long as KP feels comfortable, we got to make sure we check that that's the case.
Yeah, I mean,
Kevin.
It's very preliminary. I asked KP, this is the scenario we're thinking about. If something happens with the numbers spiking and we feel that we want to do something different than the second, can we move it? They said, let us check. We talked on quick update on the warrant. And then they said, we did look into it. You do have the ability with a vote of the select board. I believe they said that to move town meeting. And that part wouldn't be an issue. They said the caveat is you can't move the election though. So unless you do special legislation, unless we basically do a mark, if we decide, I don't recommend this, but we could, through legal means, try to allow us, and Marblehead was successful last year doing this through legal means, try to move the election as well. But no, KP did confirm that, and I haven't had a chance to dive into or to get book and verse or the MGL associated with it. But if we decide to do this, move it, and we're not sure yet, we certainly can, cross the T and dot the I as well.
Okay.
A little.
At least.
Go ahead, Dick. I'm sorry.
I was just going to suggest that we change the draft to show Masconomet and the dates as they are based on doing the bylaw, so to speak, and then we know that we need to be flexible if something happens and there's another spike. But at least the draft should be what we expect to have.
A little bit of history. We started talking about using Masconomet some years ago, primarily from a comfort standpoint, because it was hot in the gymnasium. The seats were uncomfortable. There weren't enough seats for everybody, and there were people standing up. So we said, let's do something different. And the difference was Masconomet. Now we're saying if we've got a COVID issue and you don't want to do it in the gymnasium, why is Masconomet any better from a COVID issue? So we say, okay, let's go outside. So I'm saying we need to keep that in mind. If we're doing it from a COVID issue, we haven't gained much by moving to Masconomet. If we want to do it outside because of a COVID issue, then that's a legitimate argument, I think.
So Kevin, when do we need to make a final call on this? If we assume that we're doing Masconomet unless there's a more severe problem, like if we had the town meeting, next week, are we in a COVID situation where we're comfortable having it at Masconomet? Just where we are currently.
I would have to consult the team. I'm sorry, Madam Chair. I'd want input from the Board of Health, the health director, the fire police chief. But I think that I think to answer your question, the first year when COVID hit us hard while we were going through this process, it went to print with the Tuesday, and we actually, and I thank a number of members of the board for coming in with the stick. We brought those neon stickers so everyone saw it. We crossed up the back. We put the update. We want to avoid that if we can. There was a lot but it was a great team effort. And thank you to the team here, but also the select board who participated. The goal would be before we go to print, Madam Chair. I think we have some time to make that decision. Logistically, we're planning to at least have options available to move quickly, so we're not behind the 8 ball in struggling to make a decision in a short amount of time, or to have the infrastructure like a tent or Masconomic reserve. So we've already reserved, like I said earlier, Masconomic for the Tuesday. And now we're just working with the other pieces of it to make sure we have that if we decide to move forward that direction as well.
All right. Well, we can keep speaking about it, but to Dick's point, would you find putting it back to the 3rd?
No problem.
Have it as the default. Okay. All right. Moving on.
So Article 3, that's general operating budget. We're working through that process. Obviously, more to come there. The water budget, those numbers will get updated with the proposed. I'm just waiting a little bit longer before I put those numbers in, but we can plug those in probably for version 2 now that we have a good version 1 of the water budget available.
Kevin, can I just ask you, and I could be completely off in looking at this. I was looking at the appropriation fiscal year 2022 that's in this warrant and comparing it against the numbers that Gary brought for fiscal year 22, and the numbers are different. So it says here for fiscal year 22, this was 2285337. That was total. And in the water budget on board docs, it says 2847751. So they're two different numbers. And I don't know what was different about them. I went through each of those items, and like the salary is exactly what they had in the water budget on board docs, but something's missing. That one is about 600,000 different from the other. And I don't know what piece is missing here or what I'm missing.
Sure. So Madam Chair, what I did on this one is I took under the proposed appropriation from the 21 warrant, last year's warrant. And I literally just copied it over. You can see that the actual appropriation for fiscal 22 and the highlighted proposed fiscal 23 is a mirror image. And that was the final version of the warrant that went to print. So I don't have the water one in front of me at the moment to compare it and to answer that directly. But I can say that from developing this document, Article 4 was just at this point a copy and paste from what was in the final version. So I can certainly
maybe offline we can take a look at it and just see which piece I'm not seeing that made them look different to me, those totals.
Yeah. I'm making a note, Article 4, fiscal 22 match warrant to, and then just the document you're looking at is the fiscal 23 budget with the 22 numbers in it.
The fiscal year 22 that was on Greg's document on board docs from our 2 meetings ago, I think.
Which meeting?
Was it 2 meetings ago? I think.
Yes.
So then
They just have to. They have to get fixed. That's where we are, right? I mean, there's no.
Well, it could be that I'm missing something, and that's why they're different. But they just don't look the same to me. If you look at the fiscal year 23 water enterprise budget from our January 26th meeting, and you're looking at the fiscal year 22 column, level funded budget. The numbers are just different. So
I see what
I would say, Madam Chair, is that whatever was approved at town meeting is the right number. I'll see what the variance is with Greg on what's submitted, but we'll probably, that's from a landing spot at the final version. I would imagine what was voted at that meeting would be where we went.
And it could be that his Excel spreadsheet didn't go back and change what the final numbers were, the fiscal year 22, but we were comparing 22 to 23. And so we just want to make sure the numbers line up.
That's a great catch, and we'll see what the difference is.
Thanks.
Okay. And then Article 5th, it's all yellow. We're waiting for the final or the actual submitted Masconomic budget. I will point that the language had been tweaked last year on the italicized areas. That is the same language that we used where we landed on the recognizing the percentage increases. It just now plug and play with when the number comes in, or the numbers, I should say, come in. Same thing with Article 6 with Essex North Shore. We'll plug and play based on the submittal from those which we're waiting on. The consent agenda 1, it's Article 7 to 13. All these are standard year over year, at least the last 3 years. Include a grant authorization for town projects, Mass Department of Transportation contracts, Tri-Town Council contribution. I will note that there has been a request on that is increased from Meredith Shaw, the executive director. They asked last year, but they asked too late. We had already gone past the approval processes, and basically we're going to print. And I had to let Meredith know that she'll need to ask again next year if she would like us to consider it. So I would like to just, maybe the next work session, I'll let you know what the ask is for the board to consider. And then the board can decide if in the next version we want to include it. And ultimately the FinCom will have to weigh in too, whether they want to recommend action or no action based on the increase. So I'll make a note to make sure I have that for our next work session.
Kevin, do you have any idea how big that increase is?
It was 5%, but I don't want to be held to that. But I think, I could probably look it up.
But that's in round numbers, that's the number.
Mm-hmm.
Kevin, is that asked of all 3 towns? Is that a consistent number?
I'm not sure, to be honest with you. That's not something I've asked at this point. Last year, like I said, it was a non-starter based on timing. But I can ask that question, see what it compares to the other communities when we take it up.
Okay.
Yeah, there's the funding request. They're looking for $5%. They're looking for go from 20,000 to 521,525.
Okay, we can discuss that later.
Yep.
A quick question on the compensated absences and the unemployment compensation fund. And this was more just my FYI, not that it has to be written in the warrant, but I think people would be curious if we're putting in 100,000. My question was this any change from the prior year? How much is in the fund? Is there a goal that we try to put in every year, and what is that up to? Both for Article 11th and 12th.
I think a better question is, is that just a placeholder, or do you expect to review that number? I
think that's a placeholder, right now.
Anything yellow is a placeholder. So right now those are, I believe, what last year's contributions were. Catherine and I have discussed what it should look like going forward. What we do on the compensated absence fund, and that pays for retirement in essence. When people retire, we have requirements statutorily to pay for sick time and also vacation time that's unused at a certain rate. We try to do the best we can to estimate what those retirements look like, but they have been, I've seen them in above $30,000 when I first started with a couple of retirements that came through from long-term employees here. And so that count can get drawn down very quickly if not funded properly. Last year we appropriated 100,000. I think the initial intent on our initial look is we could have at least a few people in the next fiscal year that might be subject to this. And so we'll round that number out to the appropriate number to make sure we have what we have. And be completely frank, we'll have a little bit extra in there because we don't want, if we don't have enough to pay the retirement costs, it delays the process, but it also we'll have to go look at other funding sources to cover those costs. So we've already I put a list together, shared it with Catherine, and we reviewed it already once of who we think on our team could be potentially retiring over the fiscal year.
And just to clarify, though, it's primarily for retirements, but it could be for anybody who leaves and has, for example, accrued sick leave or something of that nature.
Yeah,
that's correct.
Yeah. So you're going to review those numbers based on what we anticipate may happen, and then you'll adjust the 100,000 if necessary.
That's right. That's right. So those more detail will come as we go through different versions we get closer to. It's good to see what our revenues numbers look like as well. I mean, these are numbers we gotta fill the funds, but there's other pieces we want to at least be aware of what the certified free cash looks like, et cetera.
And in every case, when we go to town meeting, we do know the numbers so that if anybody asks, we can readily say, this is how much is in the fund already. Right.
Absolutely. And then the last one, Article 13, is the standard article that's been there for a number of years. That allows us to perform maintenance as needed. Typically, that account is used in close to its entirety. When we had the spending freeze, we did not draw down on that right away, but we did before the end of the fiscal year with some of the projects we held off on. Separate the bucket of money because the appropriation from free cash exists. However, we were just being extra cautious with spending monies until we got to a better place with the economy and understanding what the impacts would look like. So that's the standard article that we put in there each year.
You're assuming, Kevin, that you're probably going to have 25,000 in there again is the ask?
It's highlighted in yellow, but I would say it's a very good likelihood that 25 is what the ask would be again.
And is that on average what they spend annually? Is 25 look like the right number? Is it too big, too small?
No, I mean, we use between the line items in each of the different department budgets that have facility line items, like the library, the police, the fire, town hall. Depending on the needs and the projects, this account either supplements the use of those individual accounts if it's a higher cost project, or sometimes if account's exhausted or it's a unique project, we know something else might be coming that might be used out of the operating budget, we'll leverage this. We typically spend the 25 is my understanding. I know that there was a little bit of a lag because of the spending freeze and whatnot, and just trying to hold all the pennies and nickels and dimes we could back. But I think historically it has been drawn down close to its entirety and on an annual basis. Police cruiser. I added some new language in there just to reference the fact that we did purchase in 21 the Mustang Mach-E. I also left in there that the standard police cruiser was the Ford Explorer. We've talked about that. There's no decision moving forward at this time until we have more data and more use, more experience to know what direction we're heading in with that.
Kevin, a thought on that? Just since we do say the standard was the Ford Explorer, then in 2020, we set the standard of the Ford Explorer SUV. In 2021, we broke that standard and bought an EV. So some words in here, why we did that, because we just got through saying we set a standard, and then the next year we went to the EV. Whether it's to evaluate the efficiency and, just some verbiage as to why right after saying we set a standard, but then the next year we went and we did not buy the standard. And perhaps putting in words that the EV is being evaluated and a decision of gas versus EV will be made, at a later date. It's unknown at this point because it's still going through the evaluation, just so that people have a good idea as to why we made this switch and why we're not specifying at this point.
I think that's a good point, Lynn. I felt that the Mustang EV was a reasonable choice, but I think it was an evaluation process, and I think that's why we did it. I have talked to the police chief about it, and I can tell you he is totally in favor of it doing it again, but I think it needs to explain to the public why we made that change.
Yeah.
Over a course of 1 year, we make the change from one standard vehicle to another standard vehicle. And I agree with the process. I agree with the change, but I think the public needs to be aware of why we did that.
Mm-hmm.
I'll put some additional language between the standard and the EV, talking about efficiencies, costs payback period and the fact that we are evaluating for the next year the different options, something to that effect.
I think you did a good, Kevin, I think you did a good job here, but just elaborate a little bit more.
When you say, I mean, because this verbiage doesn't say we set a standard, it said the Ford Explorer was the standard. I obviously wasn't on the board then, but did the board actually say that's the standard, or was it just, hey, look out in the world, that's what police departments are driving?
The former chief identified that, as I understand it, as the vehicle choice, the same way Chief Hovey identified the EV this year. And so this is one of the few articles where it does reference with advice from the police chief, because it does give the power of the select board to make the purchase, but with the advice of the police chief. So we'll make sure that we, and that was, I do appreciate Mr. Hook, you pointing that out, because when we went through the process, we did talk about the Warren article and if we were limited to purchasing that particular vehicle, and that we had determined that it.
Marshall, we didn't get involved in making deciding what the standard vehicle was. The police chief has always done that, and
which is what I would encourage us to continue to do. And I guess really, I guess the real kind of key word in there is the word standard. Like, you didn't have a whole lot of choices before. I mean, you were going to buy a Ford Explorer. That's what police departments bought. So, you know, it's a new world 1 year later.
Yeah, and I think the wording is good that it's third party. This doesn't say the board was involved in any way. It just said the cruiser became the standard.
Yep.
So that a decision was made, and now the police are purchasing an EV and doing an evaluation to see what they want to do and where they want to take the line. So just, I think we've said it all.
Yeah. Perfect. We'll work on that language, and I'm sure we'll have some modifications too after, which would be helpful.
We'll discuss again, I'll bet.
I included here Article 15. That is the police radios for the cruisers. That was put in under the capital plan as an STM transfer. I highlighted this in yellow because with our projected free cash certification, it might be more advantageous for us to use free cash today than have the money taken out for this fiscal year out of the operating or to pay for this, and having that then be available for free cash next year, because we should have a healthy free cash number. So it's a time for discussion purposes and strategically thinking, it might be better served rather than an STM transfer for the police cruiser radios that we use free cash. But that will be a discussion between obviously the select board and the FinCom and the model that we'll be using to see if it is appropriate based on the free cash number. But I did want to recognize that is in this, if it's not something we want to use with free cash for this year and use it as an STM as indicated in the funding source for the capital plan, we would take it out. And that's why it's in yellow.
Kevin, is this, what year is this in the multi-year implementation plan? Since this is the verbiage from last year, are we doing any more after this when we buy these three?
I think there's one year.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think this is year 2 of 3, right?
3. I believe it's 3. It's my
One
understanding.
more?
I don't have chief to confirm it, but that's my understanding. It's my recollection.
I
And I
talked
cer-
with the chief just before the meeting. I had left him a message, but I finally gave him a call. This is the third one,
Okay.
and there's one more to go, but I do have a problem. I didn't spend much time with the chief because it was right before the meeting, but doing the research we've had, based on comments that are in these, we bought 3 back in, I think, FY20, and then we bought 3 in FY21, and this is for 2. So that needs to be changed in this particular one. I think that the chief said it's for 2.
I haven't updated the language on this
Okay.
one.
And then he said 2 the following year, which comes up to 10. 3322 is 10. I can do that math. But I said on the phone to him 11, and he said yes. The 11th is the bike. the motorbike here. That would be the 11th one. So I'm not sure just exactly how much, but this is not the end. There's at least 2 or maybe 3 to go.
So in 20, we bought 3, 21, we bought 3, 22, which we're in, is 2. So this is the budget for 23.
Oh, I'm sorry, if I may have gotten the years wrong, but we've had 2 3s so far.
Okay, so it was 21 and 22.
And it depends upon whether we're talking about the town meeting of 2021 or the fiscal year 2022, which was the town meeting of 2021. You just have to be careful that way.
Okay. Okay. So a couple more coming. All right.
And
It was
again,
just-
I cut the conversation off because it was right before the meeting. So we'll get a final with the chief, but we know from, I think, essentially our capital plan and what the chief said, that this is for 2.
So maybe just when we find out more from the chief, that last sentence that just kind of is vague. Further in vehicle could be.
I marked it up
just
already. As a matter of fact,
specify.
I changed the second sentence to, this is the next part of a multi-year upgrade program of in-vehicle police radios, and I took out the last sentence altogether.
The last
It's
sentence,
too,
yeah.
the last
Too
2
vague.
sentences. It's too confusing for people.
Okay. Yep. That's what I thought too. Okay, Kevin, sorry.
No problem.
Can I just
Dean.
go back to the police cruiser for a second? Because there was a question as to who said, when we said what to whom. At the 2019 town meeting, the warrant said the same wording that you have in here. That was excellent. Beginning in 2020, the model year for standard police cruiser police department is the newly modified Explorer. So that's what we told people it the first time in 2019. And it matches, the wording right here matches what's in 2019, which is really now, a long time ago,
Goes by quick.
3 years ago.
Yeah. Okay, Stewart and Proctor floors, Article 16th. Is that new? Doesn't look in yellow, so it's not a holdover from last year, that's new?
So what you'll see is, so from Article 14, the police cruiser down for more than a few, these are all tying back to the capital plan. And so this is the capital section of the warrant. This is the school's request for $60,000 for phase 1 of 3-phase project amounting to a total of $180,000 is what they're asking for over 3 years. The first one being $60,000. And the explanation was derived from their detailed capital sheet that they provided me during the capital budgeting process. So that's where the language in essence came from. I made some modifications myself as to put in there, but that's generally where that information came from.
Did you say 180,000 or 108,000?
180. So they're asking for
$63,000.
That's what it says here, but I thought you said 108. I just wanted to clarify.
No problem.
So
And then
I do have some, I had changed the text in here somewhat, and I'll send it to you. But there is one clear thing that we do have to change. It is expended by this Topsfield School Committee. They're the ones who expend things. That's all right. Don't make the change. I have a number of other changes. That changes the flow of the wording some. However, I do have a request that maybe we'll be able to get some information from them. This is one of the kinds of things that can sometimes get into a big discussion, especially when you talk about replacing the floors and things like that, just from past experience. So I wrote these words looking for some fill-in from the, perhaps we can get from the schools. This article will allow the Tri-Town Union District to begin a 3-year program to replace the flooring in the classrooms and hallways and the offices of Stewart and Proctor schools with. And what are we replacing it with? I think we need to have those words. Maybe that is in the capital plan. I didn't go back and check that, but that may be in there as to what we're actually chasing it with. and maybe there's some words which would say, and is more durable and safer. Maybe I'm putting some words down that hopefully they could come up and agree with, is more safer than the current vinyl composite tiles. Over the past X years, some X percent of the existing tiles have been replaced to repair damaged sections, and the rate of deterioration is increasing. Something to help people understand that we're not just replacing some numbers in there. So maybe we can get some help from the school committee. I think it's important to do on this one because it can create a lot of questions if we just talk about replacing the vinyl and why you're doing vinyl and what are you doing and how bad is it and all this sort of thing.
Quick question for my clarification. So the facilities, is that a function that is expended by the Tri-Town? Did they centralize facilities so they're actually expending it, or is it the Topsfield School Committee that's expending the money?
Topsfield School Committee. They're the ones who quote sign a contract, just as we sign a contract.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thanks.
Article 17 is the Public Works pickup truck. That is some of the plugging in is the value of the, we have the trade-in value, I should say, but I want to double check the dates on the pickup that we're trading in. And just confirm too that the offset is incorporated in that $50,000.
My question, because I didn't know if it was the total cost was $63,000, and then when you have a trade-in of 13, and that's why we're asking for $50,000 to spend.
Yeah.
Same thing for the dump truck next.
Yeah, no, that's the same question I had as I was writing it, to be honest with you, because I'm going off of Superintendent Wild's numbers, and I know we've talked about the need. I know we talked about how it was going to functionally work with the trade-in. I just want to make sure I double check that is incorporated, that trade-in value. I believe it is, but I'm absolutely going to double check that. It should. That's how we ask for it to be proposed to us.
So the total cost would be higher. If we're asking for $50,000, I would think the total cost for the pickup would be $63 with an estimated $13,000 trade-in, and that's why we need 50.
That's what I'm double checking. Yep.
It makes sense to me.
Okay, yeah, and obviously based on the capital plan, the 2009 is not a good number, but it doesn't necessarily match either what's in the capital plan. I had a hard time following it. There's a park and cemetery truck and there's a highway truck in the capital plan, and this is simply, I think it's going to be confusing to people to have it laid out this way. And the dump truck does not do the snow plowing, I don't think, or maybe it does. But if it does, I believe it does do plowing. Truck does also. We need some work on both of these, and they need clarity. And I think if you can put back in park and cemetery for one and highway for the other, it would be helpful.
So doesn't that create the illusion that they cannot be shared between department?
Well, I mean, we've already said we share employees doing things and things like that, but it means that it's the one that really does the things with the cemetery and the parks, and the other one is really the one that does the normal work around the roadways and things like that. I think it's better to have it laid out. That's the way it is in the capital plan, and I think it's probably better to maintain it here. So if nothing else matches the capital plan, but I think it's less confusing to the people. It's things that they understand and can relate to.
Kevin, what is Gary's department actually called?
So he's the superintendent of highway, parks, and cemetery, and what we've been referring to them as DPW. And the contract, if you look at the CBA contract, there is it differentiates between different roles, different things. We're sort of, I'd say, a flux period where we're making some transition. We're sharing resources. We're sharing people in different ways. The purpose, I brought this one up very purposefully because I didn't want there to be a confusion by having them separated out, I guess, in a sense at the same time, because I know in prior years, we've moved different things around, fire to be with fire, different things of that nature. And the funding for this, both of them, is 100% free cash, and they're going to be used interchangeably within all aspects of cemetery, highway, and parks. And so my only concern is if we infer that it's used for something specifically, I don't want there to be someone to look at the warrant down the road and say that you can't use that vehicle on highway, or you refer to it as a park and cemetery dump truck. So that very purposefully, we called it a public works one-ton dump truck, because we've been heading in that direction over the last year plus. We want to make sure we continue to blend as much as possible, because it helps with our efficiencies and our operations.
And I would say, just like, we got kind of dinged last year for only talking about a Ford Explorer under police cruiser, and eventually it was a different car. This is a little bit different, but by calling it public works, aren't we trying to be as honest as we think we can be right now? Which, again, I think we were with the police cruiser, right? We hadn't contemplated anything other than that, and things changed. But here we are and can and are actively contemplating the fact that these vehicles will be used across the width and breadth of the department. So,
yeah, I agree with that, and keeping it generic. The only thing I would change is maybe describing what it does. So it's like it'll be used for daily use, including snow removal. So I might say for mowing and something and snow removal. So it's covering all the pockets without saying it's cemetery, it's park, because I don't know what you use a pickup truck for exactly. And the same thing for the dump truck. It says for daily use. Maybe just elaborating a little bit how a dump truck is used without tying it to a cemetery or a park or a field or a highway.
No problem.
I agree. I think that leaving the wording the way it is gives Gary the option of using the vehicles in either department for whatever he wants to do. And like Kevin said, we're in a kind of a state of flux with the reorganization of this, because there are still people that want to talk about parks and cemeteries, and there are people now that want to talk about DPW. So I think we need to continue to try to move forward with the DPW idea.
You mean the one that's violently opposed by the former chairman of the highway department?
Yeah, Dick, I'm going to let you handle him.
Okay, Article 19, Public Works Vehicle Lifts.
So what I did on this one is I combined the two into one.
Excellent.
And it amounts for the total. Now, because there's going to be use by the water department, there is a 10% of the cost for that is going to be used with the retained earnings from the water enterprise. The remainder will be spent through free cash. And then the explanation hopefully gives some idea, and I'm obviously open to any type of feedback on that. If there's different language you'd like me to use or more explanation or less, feel free to provide that in a red line, and we'll take that to incorporate it.
Did we buy lifts last year? I thought I remembered funding lifts last year. No?
So we have the lifts we've had for over 20 years is my understanding. And so this,
so that was,
yeah, there's some safety issues with it that I'm not the mechanic, and I don't know if I would be if I was using those lifts that exist right now. They've been certified, but they
so maybe we discussed it last year and it got pulled. If Cam's remembering that it was in the warrant.
Well, maybe it might have been the early warrant stack we got 45 days ago or 60 days ago. I might be envisioning a pictured lift there. So I don't want to go through all those papers on this call, but I just thought that perhaps we'd already talked about a lift. It's okay.
Well, we've been talking about it since October when we talked about the capital items, because it was.
Okay, that's it. That's
2 items in the capital, so that could very well be.
Yeah,
that's
several
months ago.
Yeah. That's true. There were 2 items, and now it's brought into one, and I think that's a good idea.
Yeah, because it'll reduce the confusion, I think.
Yeah.
That was nicely going. I had just a couple of wordings with it, but which I'll offer you too. But I think it's important to add in that it is it's replacing existing lifts. So I have some wording along that line, and then I think the description could use a few some other edits.
So right now, as I understand it, we have existing one. We have a heavy duty lift. We don't have a light and medium duty lift.
That's right.
We have
It
both.
exists.
Both in the garage.
I don't believe so. Gary could comment on it better because he knows technically, but my understanding is that with the replacement, in order to do what with the mechanic coming on and managing multiple different departments' vehicles, instead of outsourcing, historically, DPW and the mechanic, or the highway and the mechanic, would do highway. That was it. What we've done now is that Patrick, our new mechanic, we're doing the COA bus, we're doing police vehicles, we're doing 1 tons, we're doing larger dump trucks, heavy duty, middle, and light. This is going to allow us to save monies going forward with outsourcing the light and medium duties and continue to be able to do. We do partial of that right now, but this will allow us to do with the lifts to get on to do more of what's needed on those medium and light. So the heavy duty is the one that's concerning and the one that exists. This would allow us to have a more broad or multiple types of 2 lifts that allow us to do significantly more work in-house.
Kevin, not that it has to go in here, but I think the question will probably come up. We reference that this is in lieu of costlier outsourcing being performed. So is somewhere in the budget a line item dropping for outsourced mechanic work?
Shame on you. Shame on you.
I thought the same one. A great question, Madam Chair. I couldn't say with a straight face yes. I don't know for certain. I don't believe that within Gary's operating budget, highway did not change from a maintenance perspective. And the cost within the other departments to maintain their vehicles, I don't believe those have been adjusted to correspond to potential savings that we might recognize.
We may want to look at that just if the question comes up, because if we're using it as a justification to move forward, it might get reused.
Well, here's what we're really trying to do. We are trying to move forward with a maintenance department. And that, I hate to use that kind of word because it's our mechanic, but we've got a really good mechanic right now, and we're trying to move forward to the point that he and that department can take care of all or most of all of the town vehicles. We've never been able to do that because we haven't had a mechanic that had that capability. But I understand that we do now, and they're trying to give him the tools to allow him to take care of this stuff. For example, I don't think there's ever been a COA bus in that garage being worked on, okay? And we're trying to move forward in that direction because we are of the opinion we can do it cheaper ourselves than hiring it out.
Right. And so I just think someone may say, where is that line item where you were hiring it out? If you can do it cheaper now with the mechanic, give us back that money. But it could be too, we had some deferred maintenance. Maybe we should have been working on these cars more and we didn't. And we can extend the life of these vehicles and reduce further repair costs by attending to them earlier.
I get what you're saying, Lynn, is basically you want an answer to that question. It may not, you're not saying you absolutely want a decrease in a budget. You just want an answer to that question.
Yeah, because I think someone's going to ask it. If we're saying we're saving money,
especially now, I think you're going to ask it.
Yes, I just did, and I'm sure FinCom will as well.
No, it's a great question. I think part of me thinks we're still, like I said earlier, somewhat of a flux, and we have been addressing the vehicles. I don't know if we have how much data because Patrick came on after the new year. Some vehicles have been treated, some we're still working on. We don't have like a full year's worth of data at this point. We might in the next month or so to get a better handle on it. But, it might be difficult, but I will absolutely talk with the department heads that are taking advantage of Patrick services to see if they've seen a drop and if they feel comfortable in their operating budget at this time dropping it. It might make sense to, I think after we get a full year plus the new equipment on board, we see what we can do. We see an actual trend. We might be able to make a better judgment in a year's time on adjustment. But if we need to find ways to also balance the budget, that might be a place that we really dig in on and say, can we drop a few $100 or $1,000 here or there to try to get there too? But that's a great point.
Yeah, because even knowing these are the 4 line items we're going to be keeping our eye on that previously we outsourced maintenance. We're not going to drop them right now. We're going to stay conservative to see what Patrick can do, but we'll be looking at those 4 to see what the drop is and reacting the following year. At least it means you've looked at it and in case the question comes up.
Do you know if we're going to get a, so to speak, a quote trade-in on the existing lift? Is it just going to go to trash, or do you know offhand?
I have no idea whether there's any market for that stuff or not. Gary might be able to shed some light on that, but I don't have that information.
So I just got some real-time information that we reduced our budget last year by $1,000 for vehicle maintenance in the fire department due to Patrick directly.
Whoa.
So we've already done it.
Whoa.
One department down.
Good job, John.
Yeah, I did it the year before too. This is a fantastic savings. And I think like Kevin just said, you're going to gather information. And the fact that I don't have to send a vehicle to North Attleboro and have it there for weeks and send someone down to pick it up and pick them up. And there's no doubt you're going to have savings. This guy's awesome.
Thanks, Jen.
Yep.
Okay, the zero-turn mower, Kevin.
So the zero-turn mower, so that is something where actually I think partly it's because of the reorganization, we have a better handle on our zero turns. I'm saying ours, it's highway, park and cemetery. Useful life is, I understand, it's 4 years on a zero-turn mower. That's our standard rotation on the equipment. They get a lot of hours. We've talked about the number of hours with Gary and how much use that we have when it comes to mowing our acres. So we estimate a 4-year. We have 4 frontline, is my understanding. It's highlighted because I just want to double back one final time with Gary to make sure I'm representing this correctly in the wording. So the plan would be is to have an ongoing regular rotation, similar to the police vehicle. We're never caught behind when it comes to that, because it is a critical piece of equipment for the TAA, the common places that we want to make sure people see, and we need to make sure we deliver on the services. So this is just starting, and we talked about this during the capital, starting that rotation period when it comes to the zero turns.
And
we did talk about it. It sounded like Gary never let the lawnmower turn off from May to October. Just someone who's on the friggin' thing for 20 hours a day. I think we need to give them a good one.
In my brief time on Park and Cemetery, that's one of the things we discussed a lot was lawnmowers. And yes, it was like the police cruiser. Every year they're replacing a lawnmower, and it's in that rotation. So that lines up perfectly with what you're talking about.
So is this any different than what we were doing before then? It sounds like, Marshall, you guys were replacing 1 per year. Is this any different?
Well, I obviously that's when it was just for the cemetery. Well, no, it would be for the park and the cemetery. Yeah. So I imagine it would be the same thing. I can't speak to the equipment. I don't remember it. I remember looking at it and going out in the garage and going, that is a really big lawnmower. But beyond that, I couldn't tell you if it was zero turn or what kind it was or anything like that. Just that rotation fits up precisely with what we were doing with Steve Shepard at the time.
I just don't know. Is this tied into the reorg, or is this what the replacement schedule was and is?
I will tell you, that might be a better question for Kevin or Gary. All I'm telling you is it's what we were doing in Park and Cemetery. And I do know that at least 1 year, for whatever reason, Steve as I recall, didn't ask for one, and therefore I think it was put off a little bit. He was worried about making whatever bottom line he had to make, and he's like, well, we can get one more year out of that guy or something like that. So I don't know if Gary's trying to, reset the standard rotation or something like that.
My only thought, Kevin, was do we need to bring up the reorg? Because in the past, we said the reorg is going to save us money and we're going to find efficiencies. And then now we're asking for a new person to come in. And does this look like now we need to turn over the mowers faster? I don't know that there's any tie. This is getting on a regular schedule to make sure the mowers are maintained. This is the life. This is when you have to turn them over. I'm not sure we need to pull in the reorg.
I mean, mostly I said it for conversation. The reason when I think of this being part of the reorg is because we're interchanging people sitting on those pieces of equipment and they're getting the use like they typically would, but there could be times when it's needed for something that maybe typically wasn't under parking.
And I leave open the possibility that it's a different piece of machinery. I mean, I that's why I'm saying I can't tell you what kind of lawnmowers there were in the cemetery garage, other than that they were much too big for my lawn. But beyond that, I don't know.
I'm not against this at all. My fear is that people are going to start to see ka-ching, ka-ching because of the reorg, or feel like some additional costs are coming down the pike and that we're not realizing the savings. If this doesn't have to do anything with the reorg, this is what Park and Cemetery was doing. Maybe this is what Gary was doing. It's just in here, the same thing as you said with police cruisers. You just need to replace the equipment every so often.
The one thing that this does say is it is being used for the highway department. So maybe the highway department, it was before also rotating through a mower or two. And maybe now these 4 mowers that used to just be for the cemetery, we're good with just these 4 for everybody. I don't know.
Yeah, which probably may not be any different than what was going on before. One group had 2, one group had 2. They were both replacing them at a certain rate.
No, that's the one thing I'm saying is cemetery had 4. So if now
are we dropping them?
If cemetery and highway still only have 4, well, then you're realizing the savings because highway is not buying its own mowers.
You were saying before cemetery had 4, highway had.
Yeah, I'm saying before, in my time in Park and Cemetery, they had 4 mowers and they were on this 4-year rotation, right?
Okay.
And those mowers were being used just for Park and Cemetery. This over here says 4 mowers are being used for Park, Cemetery, and Highway, which would indicate to me that before reorg, Highway had some number of mowers over here in addition to the 4 that Cemetery had here. So maybe now the cost savings is whatever this number in this hand with the highway mowers, that's gone. And now 4 mowers is what we need for everybody.
And that would be a good point to highlight because this doesn't say that. It doesn't say that.
I understand. And that could be me pulling stuff out my rear that is not actually true. So
it could be, Marshall. Yes. Kevin, did you drop down a mower? Did we find efficiencies?
So my purpose of putting that line in, I just reread it. The intent was just to, in my mind, say that you think of the mowers, you think of Park and Cemetery primarily. I wanted to be clear that these are for the entire sort of DPW as we're referring it to. That was why I made reference to it, but I am absolutely open to taking it out if it's confusing or leads to questions that might not be relevant or could be confusing. So that was just the purpose of why I had put it in there. Now I reread it. I remember why I did that, but again, open to suggestions. Want to make sure it's as clean as possible.
Yeah, that was my only take on it. It did raise a lot of questions for me. I mean, did we go down in mowers? Are we using it more? Was this the rotation before? Has something changed? It just adds questions that I'm not sure you need to add. If we have 4 mowers and we always did, this is just a rotation. If we drop down a mower, as Marshall said we might have, that's great to add in here. That's a savings.
I think it's important to get Gary in front of us on here to discuss it. Maybe he'll get one of his people from the Park and Cemetery if he forgets some of the real history of it. But we do have a former highway commissioner here, and I would ask Boyd, do you ever remember having a 0-turn mower for the highway department? It seems to me the way the highway department does it is the big
I
way.
don't
They have a
I don't ever remember having a zero turn mower for the highway department. And Gary's got to answer that question.
but you did have a boom.
Pardon me?
Have a boom mower.
Yeah, we did.
That's the kind of mowing that you do.
That's right. I'm not sure we ever had a legitimate lawn mower in the highway department.
Oh, yes, you did. I think you had one in order to cut the grass up at the highway building. You know, that little grass you have around there?
Yeah, but boy, let me tell you, but we're not going to spend the kind of money for a zero turn mower for that kind of place.
No,
All right. So I guess we need to learn a little more.
We need to learn a little bit more about it. Yeah.
Okay, Pine Grove Cemetery Roadway, Article 21.
Yep, that's the warrant article. The only change I need to make on there is the 110. It should be 160. That's what's in the final approved cap. 160.
Okay.
So that's an update I need to make on that one. But we've talked about that in the capital plan, so it's mostly language, right? If there's any modifications you'd like me to make, I did put in this article and the next article a little bit of information about the perpetual care fund, because I think that's something most people in town probably are not aware of and what that represents. And it gives it a little bit of relativity around what we're going to be looking to take out.
Yeah, Kevin, you did a real good job, or Gary did anyway, coming up with those numbers for us and sending them out about a month ago. So we appreciate that. My suggestion, however, is that for the purposes of the warrant, we should not put in that second paragraph in the explanation. I would leave it out, and if somebody asks a question at town meeting, to pull out all the detail about it. But there's so much behind that and questions that people would have. I think it's unfair to put it in. I don't think it's the right thing to put in the warrant as detailed data.
Are you talking about the Cemetery Perpetual Care Fund?
Yeah,
that paragraph?
The Perpetual Care Fund is an interest-bearing account.
Interest-bearing account.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I don't think we need to put that in either. I agree.
Okay. A little change. I have one little change at least. In each case, we're in the motion. It ends with the first line ends with Cemetery Perpetual Care Funds. I think you do want to get rid of that S in both cases, but there may be some other changes. But I have that in my markup. You don't have to worry about it.
Okay.
One thought, Kevin, I'm not sure we have to put it in, but in case it came up, my last question after reading that was a remainder of how many acres exist for future expansion. So we're saying that we're expanding in to give X number of new lot graves. How much do we have left to expand at a future date? And again, not that it has to go in here, but
are you referring to phase 2? Like this would be phase 1 and then a phase 2 thereafter?
Yeah, phase 2 or 3 or 4, whatever, however they may break it out. What's left once they expand? Based
on the topography and based on how many we'll be able to obtain lots. What I've been told is it should last us at least 40 years, and that to put additional lots in there would probably, it wouldn't be just clearing it like we're going to be doing in this case. It would be actual infrastructure changes to create more like a retaining wall that's then filled in. And it's really hard to say if that's something we would be open to and when that might take place. So this really maxes out what we have left for available space with minimal impacts to the structural elements of the hill. It's really, we've all been up there. There's not a lot of cemeteries are much more flat. Let's put it that way. This one, you come up to the top, we have a peak at the top. We have that extended area that's already been cleared. And then it's clearing some pines between the two areas and then around the perimeter a little bit. And then at that point, we've in essence maxed out without some significant change. And it would be, like I said, the estimates based on the number of graves we're selling now. I think, and the numbers I had, I want to say I think that Travis and Gary said it would be 30, 40 years plus before we would have to consider any more clearing. I could put that in there if you'd like. I don't know.
That actually might be a helpful piece to let people know the 40,000 will get us another 30 years. They won't be coming back for a good amount of time. I find that helpful information.
Is it for a warrant article? I do too. It's kind of like the perpetual care language. It gives a little bit more relativity around it, but I'm just curious if somebody
I think one of the variables, Kevin, could be that if we go from 25% cremation to 85% cremation, then we could have triple the space or triple the time. So it's a little tough to say. I'd be uncomfortable capping it at 40 years.
At least having the information to answer the question if it comes up, what does this buy us? It's like at least if we keep on the same path, you've got another 30 years that the cemetery will last.
I'll confirm.
You don't have to put it in.
I'll confirm the number, and at least the FinCom, when they do the read up of each of these, they can also have that at their fingertips. Because usually, as I've seen the last 2 years, the questions are initially directed to them. Unless they don't know the answer, then they do this to me.
Yeah.
So I'll make a note to put in that. Get that.
I'm going to offer you. I do have modified language for the explanation, and it does include essentially what you had said, maybe years, but I had it a little differently. Let me read it real quickly there. This would allow the town to create additional burial lots at the Pine Grove Cemetery. This article would fund the engineering, planning, clearing, and planting of an estimated X additional lots. The cemetery currently has about 10 full-time burial lots available for sale. So that may generate any number of questions, perhaps better than saying estimated number of lots, say how many years worth. I think maybe something like the number of lots is a little safer, as Cam would say, because you're not totally sure. I'm very surprised to hear that we're talking about 30 years. I'm delighted that we are, but we do about 40 burials a year, roughly. We know that. Times 30 years would be 1,200 lots. So I don't think that this effort is going to yield 1,200 lots, but maybe so. So I think we need more information also, but I'm going to offer that as what I read as wording.
To add to that then, Dick, if we have 10 lots left, it might be helpful, again, for John or Che to have at their hands that it's 40 lots per year on average that we use to let people know that we're really down to a quarter.
That's how many burials we do. So that you can kind of.
Yeah, just to give people a sense of we do 40 a year and we have 10 graves left.
They need that. They need that. Yes.
Okay, library roof.
So library roofs, we talked about during the capital plan. This is the language associated with it. The one thing I want to really tighten up though is that 30,000. I really want to make sure that's a good number before we commit to it. That's why it's highlighted. I know when we looked at the roof, the police chief and I, there was some initial numbers given to us for doing their roof over, and then we pivoted and talked to another vendor who does slate. And he said, you don't have to replace the roof. We'll just do an ongoing maintenance program annually. Slate lasts basically forever. And so we pivoted, and now we have an ongoing maintenance on the roof. We have a different type of roof over at the library. It does have a useful life that's much shorter. It's the traditional, I believe, asphalt type roof. But that all said, working with Paul Anastasia about the number, because the initial 30,000 came from our facilities person who gave us an idea of what that cost might look like for a specification sheet for the roof replacement.
One question, Kevin, what is EPDM as a type of the roof? It says EPDM and shingled roof.
I'll be honest.
It's a rubber sheet compound.
Okay.
Yeah. So it came from the write-up that I received, and that's my understanding as well.
That may be a question people might not know what that is, but again, just to have the information handy to say it's a rubber roof.
Yeah, we should put.
We could call it a subroof.
Expand that out to.
It's an extremely durable synthetic rubber roofing membrane that is used worldwide.
Yeah, just say subroof, both the subroof and finish roof.
And that's just me saying that off the top of my head, not at all.
Sure it is.
In reading.
Yeah.
Yeah, we didn't see you looking down at your computer for that, Marshall.
Sounded good to me.
And the eventual replacement of the roof, I wouldn't want it to sound like we're spending this money and at some point in time, we'll need a roof. Do we see this coming fairly soon? Is that why we're doing this study right now?
I think the study will know what it needs to be replaced as well. Not only be a specification sheet, but it'll also identify, you can get another 5 years out of it possibly too. I'm hopeful that that's how comprehensive that report will be. But I want to get that number to a good place. That I feel confident in Paul's abilities, but I want to drill down on it just a bit because it's $30,000.
Yeah, and if someone asks the driver, is that they're having an increased number of leaks, which is causing damage, and it's driving us to this decision?
Leaky roofs in the library has been a problem for several years. Laura, it drives her up the wall about the fact that she spends a significant amount of time taking care of the results of the leaking roof.
And this, we're really doing this but we have to spend this money anyway in the library budget, right? In order to meet the government specs.
This is out of free cash.
Funding.
It's a different bucket of monies. So I believe my understanding is that it's based on the operating budget. This is a free cash allocation, which I don't believe would count towards the number.
Oh, okay. Was that the faucets I'm thinking of, or the water?
Yes.
Okay.
We took that out of the free cash and we put that into the general operating budget under their main that we bumped up so that we can cover that cost there instead of free cash.
Okay.
I'm very happy that you're going to spend some time on trying to make sure that 30,000 is right, because that could generate a lot of questions where it's a specification study. We need to be able to explain that pretty well. That's a lot of money.
Agreed.
Okay, Article 24.
I didn't realize, I should have realized that the timing here. The Masconomet is having now its budget presentation for the officers of the towns, Selectmen and FinCom. I've already missed 20 minutes of it, I guess. Is anybody else planning to go to it? Hopefully. This is an in-person meeting.
Yeah, I didn't know it was in person, and I'm not able to go in person. However, they are having the school committee come on the 14th to FinCom to go through the budget and answer questions. So I'll be there for that one.
Yeah. Okay.
Dick, did you want to leave to attend that? We did have the executive session.
If we're going to continue, I mean, I'll stay at this meeting. It's more important, I guess, that physically be, to communicate at this meeting. I was just wondering if we could move it along, maybe by cutting some stuff out. What else, maybe we can't afford to. I kind of thought others would be going, and anybody would be anxious to go. All right, let's just keep going then.
So 24 is the water tank storage land purchase. So I mentioned this at a previous meeting that we're doing the water tank assessment. There's a real possibility that the size that we'll need to build will not fit on an existing footprint across the street from the DPW building on the other side of Route 1, in which case we need to find an alternative location. We've looked at the DPW site and talking with Greg and Gary and understanding the cost every foot you have to go up, because you have to build the tower at the high point of the community and the water system. And we're very close, but we're farther down on the highway building side than across the street. So we have to build it up. If there is a little bit of a rise on the adjacent property that's currently being used for a radio tower. And I've had some preliminary conversations with the property owner on that. There is some timing issues on what they're looking to do with that property and our timeliness of trying to do something in this warrant. If we were to do a land purchase as an example, to take a piece of that land so that we can build it. The cost is the analysis is pretty simple. If they want to, what's the cost to build our property up to the level it needs to be for the tower to be able to be supported at the highway garage? And then if we slide it over onto the adjacent property, which has a rise on it, what's the additional savings that comes from that? And what's the cost to purchase the land, right? So if the cost to purchase the land is less expensive than the cost to build it up on our property, then it would make sense to buy the property adjacent to us. If it's the other way around, then we build it on our property. The also consideration is we don't have a very large footprint at the existing. We were looking at the salt shed as the possible location. If we had to locate it on the garage site, on the DPW building site, which means we'd have to take that down and rebuild that salt shed to locate the tower there. What this was just a placeholder. I've learned more since the version 1 or the first list came out. I've spoken with the adjacent property owner. Like I mentioned, there is some timing considerations that could affect our ability to possibly acquire if that was the most advantageous option for us with regards to the tower location. So I don't know where that's going to land, but that is the most recent update for you folks regarding that article. And I apologize. I purposely haven't put much depth in there because we're not negotiating, but we're talking on the property. And I didn't want there to be I didn't want to be too presumptuous with anybody or get this too far ahead and then have to pull it back if something wasn't to work out the way we hoped it might.
That's good. Thanks, Kevin.
Was this recommendation coming out of the study that we're funding?
Study will confirm what we believe is that we need more capacity at the water tank for the future. So if that's the case and the existing footprint doesn't fit, then we have to find that alternative location.
Okay. Billing software for the water department.
We have a very antiquated system. It creates a lot of problems between the 3 departments that are involved with it: the water department, the treasurer's office, and the accounting office. There's a lot of manual inputting, which makes me very nervous. The team does a great job with it, but there's a lot of reconciliation. There's a lot of time spent. Billing system would allow us to go to a cloud-based system, allowing the customers to have a more easily accessible platform to access their information on their water bills. But also, and I think just as important, is it would create efficiencies within the operations of how we go about managing and reconciliating bills that we receive from billing purposes from customers, and ensuring that we'll still have manual processes and checks, but it will eliminate some of the manual inputs that are required currently in our existing system.
Does this say at all, Kevin, in any way, or would the residents take it that their water bills are not accurate?
I wrote that word, and I know I put it in there in the first draft for conversation purposes. They're not inaccurate. How do I say this?
Because the water can be expensive, and sometimes people see big jumps, and are they going to feel like that wasn't, I'm going to, dispute my bill or be concerned about the bill?
It's more of an accuracy within the multiple rounds that currently exist with the reconciliation process monthly. Because the manual inputs, we have to have multiple checks of those pieces. And so the accuracy, they're doing the best they can. And most of the times they're hitting it on the right spot. But there are times where someone inputs and then the next level checks in and they say, that's not accurate. Go back, and then they have to make an adjustment. I don't necessarily think we need to broadcast it, but that is a reality of the system that we work with now. And this would eliminate that. Maybe this is a better way to word it, if nothing else.
Let me ask you this, and maybe you know the answer, maybe you don't. And I ask as much personally because I once had a big fat question about my water bill. And if I ever get that answer to that question, I'll let you know. But would this have any sort of, would customers realize anything from this? Would their bill look different? Would the response to questions about their bill be different? Any of that?
So you'd be able to log in and see it through a single system on the cloud-based system, your bill, your history of usage. It would allow a lot more. Now that I have a larger family than I did a few years ago, I actually feel the same impact, thinking, where's my water going? Why are we using so much? And we don't have this opportunity in Beverly. as an example. I would love, though, and I can absolutely guarantee I would be logging in from time to time and maybe having a conversation.
So the answer to that question is yes. Customers will see something different at their end.
Yeah.
I don't like the word inaccurate. I think if you give the public a chance to think that they've been getting inaccurate bills from
100%.
you are
100%.
you are awaking the sleeping bear, and I don't think you want to go there.
One
That
thing
might
be a
that's
little-
good to add, if I'm not making it up, is that like Marshall might be sometimes. Anyway,
Creative writer.
yeah, is this no longer supported software? In which case, then you have to move on to something.
I can't say that definitively, Madam Chair. I think that there's that would be something Greg could speak to specifically. I know, though, that it is a very old system, and if it's not already non-supported, I know that that's probably on the horizon. I know that conversation, it has been discussed. I know we've talked about that, the supporting. I don't believe it's still supported, but it's sort of the
If it's coming off being supported, if we see that coming down the pike, then it might be the opportunity, to Marshall's point, that to give something else to the residents and to be on a system that can get ongoing support, so that we have multiple reasons why it's time to move, as well as it being more efficient.
And to Boyd's point, Lynn, I mean, he nailed it. When the water department, the treasurer's office, and the accounting department have to do true ups and, make sure that dollars are matching in 3 different departments, there's no way that can be accurate over time. I think
the
Kevin's
accurate
saying,
word really bothered me when I saw it. I thought,
without a doubt. And Kevin is saying we're building Topsfield water software for the future. We're looking down the road. We're not patching this thing yet again, and it will be obsolete.
I mean, rather than inaccurate, it's inefficient more than anything.
Definitely inefficient.
Well, yeah,
maybe that's more the word you're looking for, less about accuracy, and more about efficiency.
Right.
So
let's use both. Let's use Dick's number. Let's use Dick's number and tell him that this is an internal efficiency program that we're trying to improve. That's what we're doing here, is trying to increase our internal efficiencies between those 3 departments.
I think I could probably just take out the words inaccurate and just go create a more efficient interdepartmental operation.
There you go.
If you can say it's going to be no longer supported, or it looks like that down the pike, because this is a big expense, $25,000.
Yeah.
So, what is it doing for everybody?
Yeah.
Unless you're going to show that you're cutting man hours or salaries someplace, the efficiencies noted internally don't show up in the pocket of the resident. So
I think the best benefit, there's 2, right? It's the user experience, which they'll now have. They'll be able, I don't have to call up to the highway garage or the water department and say, can you print me out a history of my water use? And it will allow us to be more efficient. And we talked about that just the other day, trying to identify new ways to create efficiencies. And we've done a great job at it the last 2 years. And I know that there's still places like this that will be able to address that. So a little investment will hopefully go a long way.
Yeah. Now, the other one's 27th through 30th. Are they worth talking about right now, or should we wait until you have the words?
So I maybe conceptually, I don't want to prolong the meeting more necessarily, but I wanted to have this conversation with the board tonight, because this to me is probably, to me at least, the most important part of the conversation. So I said at the last meeting, Kim, you brought it up, if I remember correctly, or maybe it was you, Mr. Gant, that there might be an opportunity to take what's been asked for at the department level for increases in operational expenses in our general budget, not to take and add those costs this year, take them off. And also, because again, our certified free cash number should be a good number this year, make one-time investments in different places that could get us ahead, and make significant improvements that would eliminate the need to increase operational budgets for at least a certain period of time, hopefully for a long time, in perpetuity maybe. So the first one is the downtown beautification economic development. What that represents is we had a real cost of $10,000 last year. We were fortunate enough that we had volunteers provide us with funding. to help us pay for hay bales, for different things that we were able to do downtown. HOG, the Tomato Festival. There's different things that are costs that the organizers say, hey, is there a place that we can cover the cost for this event? And there really is not a good place to put it in our current budget, to be direct. I think the hope would be is we added 10,000 in the operating budget. And this one feels like it could be a reoccurring cost because we are making that commitment to our community. So I don't know if it's the right place to put it in as a warrant article per se, but we could, it is something I wanted to put out there for consideration because we have some amazing groups, amazing volunteers, and amazing people that want to contribute to all the good things that we're doing. But I do want to make sure that we're able to at least try to pitch in something along the way when these costs come up so that people do know that we have a stake in it as well. So that's the first one. And I will openly admit, it probably doesn't feel right as a one-time free cash appropriation. But as I'm trying to think for the future of balancing our budget, this is one of the areas I know there's a cost. And I know it's probably not something that will get a lot of support maybe at the next level for an ongoing increase in the operating budget. So I put it there as a placeholder. That's why there's no language below it, because I want to have the discussion and see if it's something we feel. And then with the FinCom too, I think next Monday, the town administrator select board budgets are going to be discussed with FinCom. I'll be presenting and I'll discuss some of these as well with them. But I want to make sure today I had the opportunity to talk with you first on these.
Kevin, if I could just say, a big piece of that, it's like 6,600 or so, are the flowers.
Yes.
And the TCP group has a program, a fundraising program that they've set up on their website specifically for putting up the flowers and the Christmas decorations every year. So they're working towards raising that. If we are going to put anything into the budget, I would exclude that at least for this year, because they're actively working on that and they've gotten thousands of dollars in from people to continue that effort. So if they're very excited about that and it's kind of putting their name out there to help the town and beautify, I wouldn't say to them, oh, don't bother, we just put it in the budget. I would let them keep working on that.
Yeah, I do feel I wanted the conversation more than anything else, and that's why it was put in the budget. And I think that there's a real cost. It's not just picking a number out of the blue sky. And there's a lot of there's a lot of excitement around the things we're doing with these little items we're doing, adding up in aggregate. But we are grateful that we have those nonprofits that support a lot of the efforts too. So.
And the other thing about the Tomato Festival, we pre-purchased, we did it in bulk. So a lot of the expenses that we got for awards and such, we still have. That was a multi-year purchase. So that would be cut back as well. So I don't think that bucket is as big as it first looks from what it was this year.
And I think that I get the sense myself that it's probably, knowing how we've been able to fund in the last couple of years, it's probably not going to be moved on the budget in the next level. And that's okay. That's why I wanted to make sure I put it here for discussion. And there certainly are probably places, if we have this, if we say we put 10,000 into an account, it wouldn't be set aside for ongoing costs. It would be when something comes to us that might be unique. Like if somebody said, as an example, Cumberland Farms, we're going to do a mural on Cumberland Farms. We can fundraise X, we can get donations for Y, but we need this from the town on Z to get us over the finish line. Having a place where we could potentially draw down on that for those projects as they come up. That was the thought, I guess, at the end of the day, of why it's in there. But we can certainly, I don't think we need to make any, we could tonight if you want to take it out or keep it in, but that's the thought behind it.
I would just like to interject here and give you my opinion. There are groups of volunteers around town that have the capability and the population in their group and the ability to raise money. Okay. And I don't think that's what this is all about. I think those people should be continually expected to try to raise money for those kinds of things that they like to do. My opinion is that this amount of money, $10,000 or whatever you want to put in it, is something that you can use if somebody comes to you that says, we don't have the ability to raise money, we don't have a big enough population to raise any money, but we'd like to do something that would make the town a little bit better. Okay. That gives you the capability of trying to help them out, in my opinion. And that's the way I see this whole thing playing out.
Yeah, it's like a solar bench. We had a grant, fortunately, that we were able to pay for the solar bench. That was a one-time grant. It wasn't for the bench per se, it was for the COVID relief, and it fell into a bucket that allowed us to do it. But if we have a creative idea that comes up or something we can do to beautify that might not be something, I mean, we could always go to the volunteers and the organizations, but it's helpful to be nimble and have something where we can move quickly and not always ask for the third party too. So that's just the idea. And I appreciate that, Mr. Jackson. Thank you.
Just one quick clarification that the TCP, the nonprofit, its sole purpose is to raise money for beautification of the downtown. So unlike, I don't think we should constantly lean on the garden club, because you're right, Boyd, they have other things that they're doing and they've been very generous. But in the case of the TCP, who is funding the programs for the flowers, that's why they're in existence. They're a 501 whose raison d'etat is to raise money to do these projects. So they don't feel put upon. That's why they signed up for it.
Yeah.
So click on that.
The next one is the landfill improvements. And so I've gotten better numbers on that and what the plan is. So what was proposed in the operating budget was, I think, $10,000 for landfill improvements. After doing a deeper dive with it, there's really one significant cost that could be up to $20,000, could be $15,000, $20,000 in cost, which even that line item wouldn't cover the cost of that. In addition to that, there's some miscellaneous repairs, caps, and different things that need to be done to from an operational standpoint at the landfill for the infrastructure. Idea with this would be to put aside one-time funding to allow us to do a blanket improvements of the infrastructure at the landfill. And hopefully that'll set us up for the next 5, 10, 15 years potentially, rather than putting in an ongoing cost into the budget, which may or may not be used on an ongoing basis. But that was the thought process behind here. Again, removing something that might be more of a one-time ask within the operating budget, which could be an ongoing, and using that free cash to get it.
Evan, the landfill improvements strike me as something that we might be eligible for state grants. Looking down the road, is that right or is that not right?
I'd have to look more into that, Mr. Brown, to see exactly. Do you have any particular grants you're thinking of?
No. Again, it just strikes me as something we've talked about in the past. And I thought someone, not you, had brought that up, had spoken about it, in the recent past. But I'm not pointing to a very specific grant. I'm just asking you if there's a possibility.
I mean, the world of grants is very broad and sometimes very narrow. So I think I'm not aware. DEP comes to mind as a potential grantor, but I'm not aware of any particular programs that would address, basic maintenance in some projects like that off the top.
Okay.
But we could look into it and see if there's another opportunity with that. But again, the thought is this could definitely, in my mind, be a one-time expenditure that gets us ahead versus an ongoing maintenance that we build into the budget. That way, we're running as lean as we can within that operating budget on a year-to-year basis.
Kevin, are these landfill problems that we have safety issues, or would they be violating some kind of standards from a state perspective?
It's so, like for instance, one of the let me just read the language. I want to make sure I say the right word.
My only point is if they are, I think that
Well.
leads more credence and credibility to needing the money to support this. If we're going to be in violation or someone's going to get hurt.
I have received language from our consultant working in collaboration with our health director regarding this article that I'm going to plug in for version 2. And within it, it talks about replacement of one bedrock monitoring well, approximately 50 feet deep, and providing repair and well components at other established monitoring locations. It's the design, all the repairs will be designed to increase the long-term usability of the landfill monitoring network. This is all a result of several defects within the current monitoring wells network, where the town finds it necessary to repair and replace established monitoring points across landfill service.
And not that you have to answer it all tonight, but just stating, I would support something if we were going to be in violation or if people were going to get hurt, if it's something that we have to do.
Yeah, I think it's I think one of the well lid that's missing, for example, it's supposed to be covered. For instance, DUP came out, they'd write us up and say you got to replace that. So all of these are things that are necessary to keep the landfill going. The one major one's that well that needs to be drilled.
And when you come back with the specific language, we can go through some of the specifics that it references.
Right. And again, I left this purposely out for language because we haven't discussed it with FinCom in depth yet. And Monday, I do plan to have the conversation on these as well. So I didn't want to be too presumptuous ahead of that conversation. The tree removal and plantings.
Excuse me, just going back to the landfill. If we have a very specific project, which is, for example, reconfiguring the gas collection system, and we have essentially an estimate from some engineers,
Yes.
I can see putting in a warrant article that does just that. It's very clear what wants to be done. And it wouldn't be an improvement. It would be essentially landfill maintenance and it would say landfill maintenance to reconfigure the gas collection system. Where were you getting that wording that you were reading? Wendy wrote that?
No, it was our consultant, our landfill consultant.
Oh, the one that replaced Western Sampson.
Mike,
doing the monitoring and such. Okay.
That's right.
Okay. Oh.
And then he gave it to Wendy. Wendy tweaked some of the language, sent it back. He said, good to go. They gave it to me and they said, here it is, Kev.
So if he's got a very specific program that has a need and can define it with a certain amount of dollars, that is something that makes sense that we would do. And to fund that, because it's not an ongoing thing, it's something that he's identified that needs to be done, like reconfiguring the gas collection system is the thought that I would have. Maybe that's what he's after. Then let's get the details, and that's what the landfill, it would be a landfill maintenance of the gas collection system. And that'd be clear, and people can make a decision based on that. X number of dollars is the estimate.
I'm getting a read that this is one that the board feels comfortable if I put some depth to it, some language to it for the next round.
And can explain why it has to be done. But what the value to.
Well, Dick, I agree with you totally. I think that the real issue is maintenance of the gas collection system and the flares. Those things require maintenance. And I wouldn't call that improvements. I would just say landfill maintenance and let it go at that. And we're not talking about landfill improvements in terms of leveling the fields and all that kind of stuff. We're talking about maintenance of the gas collection system and the flares.
That's right.
So Kevin, when you come back, if there's anything else specific like that has been recommended, we can just walk through those specifics.
Sounds like a plan. Tree removal and plantings. That is a number of months ago, there was a conversation about the trees in town and the fact we're not able to be proactive with removal of trees. We're usually reactive. Trees come down, we spend the $7,000 we have in our tree removal account and we remove them during storms, or if they come down naturally. The idea with this article is to address that to some extent. We are fortunate enough to leverage National Grid and their arborists and their tree removal team to get ahead in a number of areas. But there are certain areas that National Grid's come out and said, that's not a tree that we'll remove. It doesn't affect the wires. It's not within the scope, but it is our responsibility. And there are homes that are next to it that are concerned that that dead tree on town property is going to come down on our home. And so we don't have a place to do that. So the idea with this item is to be able to one time come up with a comprehensive plan, working with David Bond, Gary Wilds, and identify the trees. I think David told me there's a list of 50 trees that he is concerned with that National Grid won't remove. And that's our responsibility that we're sort of just keeping an eye on because we can't be proactive within the operating budget. Hope here is to give, I'm meeting with David tomorrow, actually. We're going to do a drive and we're going to look at exactly those trees. And we're going to come up with a list and we're going to come up with a dollar amount that we estimate the cost to get ahead of that. But I also put in plantings because we are a beautiful community that has people care about their trees here. And I appreciate that. People care about their trees everywhere. But I think that anytime we take a tree down, we should try to put a tree back up somewhere, maybe not in the same location, but maybe in another strategic location that makes sense. So the idea here would be not only to remove, but also to identify locations where we might be able to do some tree plantings after the removal takes place.
I think the approach here is one of the purpose of the removal is to improve public safety. The plantings are a separate thing. We could have a separate article with whatever, or in a budget, money for plantings if we want. I think mixing the two is wrong because the real purpose of the removal is that of safety. And that would be the reason we would ask for it. But again, I believe that it belongs in the budget because trees keep growing. And if the 7,000 has not been enough, such that we've built up the inventory of trees that need to be taken down, then we need to increase that budget. We need to make it clear that we need to spend more money managing the trees that are on town property that are getting more mature and dangerous.
But wouldn't you also need to, just think about like the school roofs or any sort of thing that hasn't been taken care of for a long time. At some point, you need to expend a big chunk of money to get caught up on where you should have been this whole time, or not a big chunk of, whatever, a larger than annual maintenance amount of money to get caught up on what you should have been doing the whole time. And then maybe the annual maintenance number makes more sense.
I also would just mention, I believe Hamilton, I'll double check this, but I believe Hamilton a few years ago put aside $100,000 to address their trees in a warrant article, like a one-time spend to get caught up. So I can double check that to make sure that is an accurate statement. I heard that at one point. I believe Joe told me that, but just sort of the relativity around the ask. It's not just a unique one, I guess, in that way.
Yeah.
If I didn't cut my lawn for a year, it would be a field, and my normal lawnmower couldn't take care of that. But after I got it taken care of with some, whatever, then I'd be back to normal maintenance of my backyard. So I think that's kind of in my head what the tree thing is.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Kevin, just from a relative perspective, if we usually have 7,000 in there, that takes down how many trees? 10, I'm guessing. If we're looking at taking down 50 trees, are we looking at, as 5 times the normal budget, to Marshall's point, that we would never have that as a sustainable ongoing budget item because it's that significantly different? I don't know what 7,000 takes down.
So my understanding is that 7,000 is purely reactive. It's when trees come down in storms. We're not able to use those monies to proactively take down trees. And typically, depending on the size, you could be looking at anything from $1,000 to $5,000 potentially. Okay. Dave's going to help me with some of these numbers. He's much closer to it than I am, David Bond. But it sort of varies. So reality is, I've talked to the team, and the 7,000 that we have, it's one storm, maybe 1.5, maybe 2 if it's a couple of lighter ones with a couple of trees that come down. But it really only scratches the surface of what the needs are. And
that's not a lot.
they've found creative ways to sort of account for it, which I'd rather we just, if we're able to do it right, do it right.
Okay, so if you want to come back with a magnitude here of a number with Dave, what are you looking at? A couple of weeks to come up with the number, or do you have a sense?
Dave's picking me up here at 8:15 tomorrow morning. We're going for a drive.
Your time.
To your point, if we're going to catch up and do a whole bunch of them, we might be able to go out to contract and get a better deal from somebody to say, you're going to come in and go through a bunch of them instead of picking one here and one there. But it seems to me that if we've been able to build this inventory of trees that are a challenge, the amount of money we've been putting in the budget is not enough. And we should be looking at increasing the budget so that we do have enough. Occasionally, the trees have been taken down before they actually come down. I can think of one that was leaning, and then we took it down before it came down. So maybe often it's one after it comes down, but we've also taken some down when they are clearly a problem.
Yeah.
Okay, next one, park and ball field improvements.
So this one I'm actually really excited to talk about. I know it's late in the evening, but I'm had a 2-hour meeting today with Gary Wilds, Travis Good, our foreman, and Stephanie Sweeney. And we're talking about the rate increases at the ball fields for TAA and field use. And we also talked about, we've been swirling around with all these different concepts of how we can, with what we have for existing resources and not asking for so much, what's the most effective way that we can address the concerns of not having enough hours and enough support to take care of the fields at the level that TAA would expect from us. And one thing that we've been talking about, well, two things. One is the potential outsourcing of the cemetery. We have 108 hours at the cemetery that we use of our people's time each week during the years. We've got a number from a vendor who does municipal cemeteries in a couple of other communities. That's a very reasonable number, actually. And I say that relatively because we got an initial quote of over six figures. This one came in recently at 78,000. And I say that this is interesting because if we ask for a single person and we get 37 hours, 30 hours out of the person out in the field, that will cost us 50,000 plus benefits. If we pay, and we have to pay that out of the operating budget. If we were to outsource it, it would cost us about $80,000, but we would have 108 hours now freed up and moved to other places where resources are needed. Hopefully that would alleviate as much of a need immediately for another FTE and would allow us to also use other funds to pay for that. We have 2 summer help people that we pay about $30,000, $25,000 of that is used from the revolving account. We would not need that anymore because that's purely for the cemetery. That money can go to offset that $80,000 in the operating budget. In addition to that, I would propose a $30,000 reduction out of the perpetual care fund to also offset, if we choose 30 is the right number, to offset that number in the budget. And those funds cannot be used. Well, the perpetual care cannot be used to fund a person. So we have a fund that's set up that's yielding over the last 12 years 3.08% annually. Last year, 4.58% in interest-bearing account. We can use those, the average annual or slightly below that, to pivot and use that for the care of the fields. And that, like I said, 108 hours a week, that's 3 people that we would be using part-time and full-time at the cemetery that can be deployed in other places. I believe it gets us our biggest bang for our buck. And it also would allow us to, to experiment with it. And then what we're talked about today was we can pull the parachute on this. We can give it a try in the first year, the outsourcing, a 1-year contract. And if it doesn't work, we can walk away from it. And we're not changing staffing levels otherwise. We have turnover now with our summer help. There's no expectation. We don't have anybody right now to come in. So the timing on it's really good. Talking with the guys, we've talked for a few weeks on this, and we've gone from an idea to getting some quotes, to talking through the impacts from an operational standpoint, morale standpoint. What does it mean? Today, I told the guys, we all felt really good about it, but we said, let's take the night and sleep on it before we commit to anything. And if this is the path, but I'm sharing with you preemptively before we have that night to sleep on that, before we have that 2:30 in the morning moment where we say, this is great, or we didn't think of that. But we feel really good right now coming out of that meeting that we might have a solution to this, that yes, it would on the budget, it would increase that, but we have offsets now that can offset that, and we would eliminate the summer help, which also helps us create monies that would be dedicated for people to be put towards that cost. I say all that to kind of give reference to the next component of this, which is the park and ball field improvements. We feel strongly that we cannot deliver or increase, I should say, the fees to the TAA without an exact plan of how we're going to make the fields better. We've committed to trying to do that. And now that we're going to increase the fees by 12,000, 18,000, 20 plus thousand, which it could come out to be, how are we going to address that? So what we talked about was that there's really 6 key points of how we can do that. One is I've talked about committing somebody, Stephen in particular, in the park and cemetery department, to be the lead for the fields. He's responsible for it. Gives ownership and a pride of work. We did a little bit towards the end of last season. It worked out really well. It's also making sure field reservations are done in a way that is not a call the hour before the event. Hey, can you get down in line the fields? We need a schedule from them, which we'll be requiring with our new permit application so that we can have a master schedule. So that'll be more effective in delivering services. We talked about the outsourcing of the cemetery. That's real, because that 108 hours can now get pushed to the common and the ball fields and other locations that we need it. And then there's 2 others, not 5, not 6, my apologies. The other 2 are what this article represents, and that's getting us an opportunity to get our fields at a good starting spot. The fields have not been, the fields need a lot of work. And when we hit the spring, they're already in a sub level just by years of different types of work on the field. I've said this before, the railroad tie effect on the baselines. That's real. And we had a real success story in doing one of the fields last year up at Pie, one of the Little League / softball fields. So the idea with this article is funding the improvements for the additional 3 ball fields up at Pie. It's the 2 at Clock and 1 at Proctor. And in addition to that, we're looking into it more, but identifying the cost to drill a well and irrigating Clock Park. And that would take care of the soccer and the other field areas. And so we can maintain with water the new sod we would put down with the ball fields as well. So it addressed the concerns from TAA when it comes to the field's conditions, the ongoing conditions, because we'll upgrade the fields to the starting spot that we think we would need it. And it would reduce some of the labor costs or labor time needed at the ball fields as well. Not significantly, but it would reduce that because the fields now are starting at a better place. It's just re-edging. It's picking some of the weeds out. It's not trying to get leveling the fields each year and different things that come along with it. So the guys do feel if we had the improvements on the fields, we would not only do what we said we would do with TAA, get those fields to a good starting spot, and we'd be able to do it next year. And we'd probably do it this summer, and we'd probably maybe bleed into the spring of next year to get them all done. But we'd get our guys to a good starting spot so we can hopefully have some reduction in all the hours that we're doing. Simple things like putting a warning track in makes a big difference. Now they're not weed whacking along the fence. They're just mowing along the edge of the end of the outfield. Those little
Kevin,
things.
Can I ask you just a question, a higher level? This amount of money that you're asking for here, is it 80,000? What's the magnitude of what you're asking for this?
Yeah, so right now we're trying to quote out what the well would cost us to do the well for the irrigation. We estimate it would be, I think, about $45,000 to do the fields, the fields that I listed. So it's 45 plus the irrigation if we decide that is a feasible feasible thing to do, and that what the cost would be on it. If they come back $500,000 to dig a well, which I don't think it will cost us, we certainly would not be doing that in this warrant article.
Okay, and separate from this, are we still asking for the person for Gary over and above this amount?
So the plan would be that if the team, after sleeping on it tonight, comes back and we talk tomorrow and they agree that the outsourcing is something we want to pursue, this would be in lieu of that position. It would buy us at least 1 year to assess this alternate way to do business that would allow us more hours to put other places.
Okay, you're calling this the outsourcing? This 80,000?
Oh, sorry, the 80,000. Yes, so the 80,000. It would cost us $80,000 in total to outsource. 78, round up to 80, and then based on the estimates that we received, the latest one, with that 80, we do have offsets that we can take advantage of through the cemetery funds.
All right, and that the person that we're asking for Gary, that was like 50,000 plus benefits,
I think we had about 75 built into the budget for that,
including benefits.
With the benefits.
Okay.
So we're looking at what this would require us to increase in the budget by 5,000, but now we're offsetting that with monies we wouldn't have otherwise had available to us.
Kevin, I'm just going to raise my hand and say so many numbers have gone down in the last 15 minutes. I have absolutely no idea how much money you're going to be asking for this one. I not even a clue.
No, I apologize. There's a lot. I know. I told the guys, I told the team that I was going to put a PowerPoint together to make it really simple. I obviously did not have time before tonight's meeting because we met this afternoon. But the idea is to try to simplify it and create it on paper so it can hopefully be followed, because there's a lot of it's been weeks in the process of getting to this point, and there's a lot of pieces. There's a lot of stakeholders that we're trying to address with the TAA and others, families at cemeteries, and trying to address the shortage in numbers, what it would cost us to outsource, the summer help now, that problem goes away. There's a lot of bouncing balls, there's a lot of pieces to this story that I need to give you in a much better way.
At a high level, Kevin, it looks like you're redoing 6 fields, potentially putting in a well that would irrigate clock, and then you won't need summer help and you won't need Gary's person. And you're evaluating this as an outsourcing approach on an ongoing basis that might be cost effective as a way of doing business.
Absolutely.
But
That was good.
So, if you can pull that together, the specifics of that for us to talk a little bit more about, that would be great. If I could throw out there, now we have about 11 more articles and we still have an executive session to get to. Do we want to push off the discussion on the other 11 articles to our next work session next Wednesday and let Kevin put together and update this document based upon the information from tonight? Or are you up for going through the last 11?
Selfishly, I've got 18% battery power left, and I just didn't think I needed 3 hours with a plug today. So I would love to push off the other 11 and get to Kevin.
Yeah. Does that sound okay to everybody?
Sounds okay to me.
So if I get a chance to make some comments on what we're talking about, I was quite excited about the fact that we can look outside and perhaps outsource the cemetery. That if we have somebody who's retiring, that we can not have to replace, but rather use an outsourcing such as that. I think that's great. The second part of it concerned me because you were not going to replace anybody. You were simply going to move those people someplace else. That's not good. That sounds like expansion, and you know that it means there's additional costs. If we can't reduce the bodies, then it's additional costs. So overall, this does not sound like a good proposal to me. We're moving in the wrong direction. People are concerned about taxes, and we need to be laser focused on that at times.
I would agree we got to keep an eye on the budget, but Gary has said he can't do what needs to be done with the staff that he has right now. So he was asking for basically $75,000 to get another body. What they're now proposing is instead we outsource for that same amount of money and see if that's actually a more effective way to go.
And we get
What
108
you have to
hours.
understand is how 3 years ago we were able to do it with Emerson Field, no longer with us, and get it done.
I don't think we did.
Yeah,
We
that would be my point. We didn't do
The
it
town
well.
ran, it got done. You can't say it didn't get done. It got done. So we
I
have to
honestly, I
understand
can say,
why
Dick, I
we
can
have
say
to
it didn't.
increase.
I can say it didn't get done. It didn't get done well. It didn't get done nearly as well as it needed to get done. Was the grass cut? Sure, I guess so, but not well enough. Not particularly if you're raising fees. And again, I know that I end up saying it every single meeting, but I will say it again. Yes, we need to watch taxes, but for those taxes, people expect services. There are two sides to that coin. And I think too often we only look at the one side. Let's cut. There are services for taxes, and you cannot get there just by cutting everything.
We're
I
not
think we
trying to
heard
cut
pretty
anything.
loud and clear.
We're not trying
I
to
just-
cut things. We're trying to keep them as they were, efficiently getting the job done. This is
Except
not
it was
cutting.
not getting the job done. You've got Gary telling you it wasn't getting the job done. You've got TAA telling you it wasn't getting the job done. You've got me telling you it wasn't getting the job done. You've got plenty of people who tell you it was not getting the job done.
I
And I
have,
think,
I have talked, I have talked to a guy that is a friend of mine that lives in Topsfield that's in charge of maintenance of the Turner Hill Golf Course. And he said the fields in Topsfield are absolutely atrocious. All they ever did was mow. They didn't do anything else. He said, I don't know how you can expect to charge people for the usage of those fields in the condition that they're in. He said, it's a disgrace. And if you think that that's getting it done, it isn't getting it done. They mowed the grass. That's all they did.
I think it's important too that the same people who are here for many years doing that work are the same ones telling Gary it's not being done well. There's so much that's being overlooked. So it's not like you're bringing in a new crew who's criticizing the old crew. The existing crew who's been around is identifying with Gary the things that have not been done. So we've got the same input coming from multiple groups. So I think it's worth seeing Kevin's presentation with some more detail and have it written out there, because I'm always in favor of contracting as opposed to hiring. Hiring involves so many expenses, long-term, that just stay with you. I think it's worth, and I appreciate them trying to be creative and come up with solutions that are, out of the box. It's not what we've done before, but it may be time to start doing it.
I think a summary of this, and I appreciate this conversation greatly, and thank you. I wasn't necessarily planning to give you all this information because it's still a moving target, and I don't have that presentation to kind of nail everything down. But the bottom line and the sort of, there's a lot to it. But what I would emphasize from just $1 and cents for $30,000, and I say 30 because we can now offset that cost with monies in the cemetery fund, which are put in there specifically to maintain the cemetery, instead of a $75,000 cost within the operating budget net. And we're getting, instead of 30 or 37 hours in additional labor, we're getting 108 coming back.
The numbers are flying a little bit, though, Kevin. I think maybe because we've had almost 3 hours of discussion. My mind isn't taking any more numbers in.
I'll make sure.
I don't know if the others are feeling that way.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate
one item that is a historical item. In 2004, town meeting rejected a irrigation system for Clark Park.
When was that, Dick?
2004.
Maybe we could talk with
years
someone
ago.
about why it was rejected, or why it maybe makes sense now and it didn't then, or why it won't even make sense now. It's good to have that input. Dick, is there someone to talk to?
It's because you can't water when you have to water.
the dries. Yeah, we get the water. We did talk about that, and that was part of it. So when I mentioned that, we're not committed to the irrigation. It's the ball fields. That is something we have a good number. We feel comfortable. We know what we'll be able to get out of that. The 45,000 I mentioned. The plus is the irrigation, if that makes sense to drill that well. And I think that's a great point, Mr. Gant, because it did come up in our conversation, but we still wanted to pursue what that would look like from a cost and talk with some people on that as well. So if I there's one last article that's blank. I know we're running short on time and I don't want to prolong the meeting, but if I can get guidance on that, I can maybe draft some language for the next meeting. Would that be okay? I don't want to.
Last one.
All right.
Yeah.
That's the municipal separate storm sewer system, MS4. And we've had a consultant locally who's helped us with that since its inception, who won't be participating going forward in supporting the efforts. MS4 still will live, and it has previously lived. I'm getting a number associated with this from a consultant, what the cost would be to get caught up on some of the items that is believed were not necessarily done previously, so that we can get to a starting point going forward. That's where we should be and need to, so we can keep moving forward. We know the cost to have a consultant help us on an ongoing basis is not going to be the local discount we receive, but that'll be addressed separately in hopefully a future year if needed. But for this year, again, trying to be sensitive to the operating budget. We had 10,000 as an over ask. It really should and could be larger, but the intent is to offset that first year, bring a new consultant on by having a warrant article that we can use to get caught up one time, and then address any over that we identify once we have a better sense of cost in a future year.
Was it 10,000? Is that what this article dollar number is?
So Heidi Gaffney's working with the consultant who's in the next 2 weeks. I gave her a 2-week deadline on Monday to get me a number of what it would cost to get caught up. It might and likely will be closer to 40 plus a one-time spend to get caught up on the previous items.
Wow, that's a lot of items that were not kept up to date. Is there anything in the operating budget right now that would come out with this 40,000 going in here?
Just the over ask component of it. We'd still keep the 10,000 in there to allow us to do this year's basics.
And is that what it was last year, or is that the over ask?
Keep that flat. And with this article, we'll get a number that'll allow us to get caught up and possibly get this year taken care of too, so that in the operating budget we won't have to address it and we can look at it.
Is there an over ask right now in the budget for this item that would be coming out?
10,000.
10,000. Okay.
Wait a minute. There's 10,000 in the budget last year and this year for stormwater. Is that the one you were referring to?
Historically, there's 10,000 stormwater for consultant services. That would be maintained at the 10, but the over ask that's existing right now in this year's budget that we asked for, if we had the warrant article go through, we take that 10,000 extra out of the operating budget out for this year.
But you just said 40,000.
And that's a back
Is
envelope.
It 10,000 or 40,000 that we're talking about? In other words, did you wish that we had 40,000 in the over ask?
So I wish it was still 10,000. I think
what you're saying, I just understand the 10,000 in the over ask and this are the same thing, but you're now understanding that it's going to cost more than 10,000.
Right. It's going to be 40 now.
To get caught up and get this year done, it'll be 40.
And so if we don't have this warrant article here, we're going to update the over ask in the budget for 40,000. I
don't know that for certain until I have, but that would be the idea.
Yeah.
Something in that order, 40,000.
That's the idea.
If we don't do this, you will increase the over ask by some amount, maybe in the category of $20,000, $30,000 more.
Reluctantly, I think we'd have to.
Yeah.
Which doesn't make sense.
Trying to understand what fits where, which numbers go where. Thank you. I got it.
Which doesn't make sense because it's not an annual. That won't be the number going forward. That's a bump. That's a one-time catch-up.
Understand.
Yeah. Okay. So what do you need from us, Kevin? Can you write the wording that way, double check that number, and then we can discuss it in more detail later?
That this was I just wanted to make sure that this was something that everyone was okay me moving forward with some language, and that it makes. I'm going to take out the beautification unless you want me to leave it in.
I'd pull it.
Okay.
Considering everything that's going in there, I'd pull it.
And on tree removal, please remove the plantings, because it is a separate. If you want to put a separate article on, that's all right. Go ahead. But I think you're mixing apples and oranges there. Let's just do the removal, because there are these tall pine trees along the roads and that I mean, when you pull them out, you don't want to replace them. They don't belong that close to the road. And a lot of the things that we're talking about are things that are close to the road because they're part of town property. Most of the things that we're talking about, because that's where the power lines are for the safety of the grid, so to speak. So the plantings are a separate thing, I believe. So I'm asking that you just take out and planting.
I don't have a problem with that.
Is
either.
it okay if I separate plantings for now? And then we can come back to it, or is planting something we don't want to consider?
I think
I
I'd
wouldn't
push
try
it
to
off.
consider plantings this year. I think
There's so much already.
Perhaps the new sustainability group can focus on some plantings.
Good idea.
Next.
Good idea.
Okay, there's no next.
Our real issue here is tree removal and getting rid of those that are hazardous. And I think that's what we ought to concentrate on.
Yep, sounds good. So Kevin, you've got everything you need from us up to this point to put in the next iteration. And then if you have additional information for the others that we didn't get to, that you update because new numbers have come in or wording, that'd be great.
There'll be no planning article. That's the last update. I'll stop.
Okay, all right, great. Thank you so much, Kevin.
Thanks, Kevin.
Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you all.
Could I get a motion to go into exec session, please?
Motion by a roll call vote of the board to enter into a closed executive session in accordance with Mass General Law 30, Chapter 30A, Section 21A, under Exemption 2 to conduct strategy session in preparation for negotiations with
Non-union personnel?
I guess non-union. Oh, I guess it's on the next side. No,
It's page 2.
I don't know. Somebody else finish the motion.
With non-union personnel, if an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the bargaining or litigation position of the public body and the chair so declares, the board will not return to regular open session. The topic is Town Administrator Kevin Hartunian contract renewal.
Second.
Second.
Okay, Deb, did you get all that? Okay, we'll go to roll call. Mr. Gant.
All
I got it.
Thanks, Deb. Mr. Brown.
Aye.
Mr. Jackson.
Aye.
Mr. Hook.
Aye.
And Ms. Bermudez says aye, so it passes unanimously. Thank you. So we are now in executive session. Debbie, I'm happy to take any minutes and put them together.
Yep. I'm going to make you the host and I will be out.
Thank you so much. Does anyone need a 2-minute bathroom break or to get a cup of coffee or anything? No?
Yeah, I'm out. Keep on. Yeah.
Okay. All right. If you don't mind, can we just take 2 minutes?
Sure.
Yeah, sure.
That's fine.
I just drank all this water. Thanks. Be right back.